The morning sun hadn't yet burned through the mist when Samuel drove the shovel into the hard earth one last time. The hole was deep enough now, deep enough for Thunder, his last companion from a war that had taken everything else. The horse lay still beside the grave, its once proud neck bent at an unnatural angle, eyes clouded over like windows to an abandoned house. Samuel's hands, scarred and weathered like old leather, trembled as he set the shovel aside. 5 years since Appomattox. 5 years since he'd stood in a field not unlike this one, watching smoke rise from what had been his home. Mary's garden had still been burning when he found them. His wife, his boy, barely 3 years old. The Confederate raiders hadn't cared that Samuel wore Union blue. To them, any homestead was fair game in those final desperate days. Thunder had carried him away from that nightmare, carried him west to this patch of Colorado territory where no one asked about the ghost that followed a man. And now even Thunder was gone. Stepped wrong in a prairie dog hole yesterday evening, snapped his leg clean through. Samuel had held the pistol steady, whispered thanks into the horse's ear, and done what needed doing. A soldier's farewell to a soldier's friend. The earth fell heavy on Thunder's body, each shovelful, a small thunder of its own. Samuel worked in rhythm the way he dug countless graves during the war, shallow ones in Virginia mud, frozen ones in Tennessee winter, mass ones that still visited him at night. But this one was different. This was the last tether to his old life, being severed, buried 3 feet down in Colorado soil. He was smoothing the last of the dirt when he heard it. The sharp crack of splitting wood, followed by a woman's scream that cut through the morning air like a cavalry saber. Then came the terrible sound of wheels leaving the ground, the crash of impact, and suddenly silence. Samuel's body moved before his mind caught up old instincts firing like they had at Antietam at Gettysburg. He grabbed his Springfield rifle from where it leaned against the fence post and ran toward the main road. The mist parted as he crested the hill, revealing devastation below. A wagon lay overturned in the ditch, one wheel still spinning slowly against the sky. Mail sacks and parcels scattered across the road like seeds thrown by a careless hand. The horses had broken free, standing 50 yards away, steam rising from their flanks. And there, in the middle of it all, a small figure in a blue cotton dress stood frozen, staring at something Samuel couldn't yet see. As he descended the hill, rifle ready, the child turned. A girl, maybe 7 years old, with hair the color of wheat, and eyes wide with the kind of terror Samuel had seen too many times before. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. She just pointed. Samuel followed her gesture and found the woman. She lay half beneath the overturned wagon, her legs pinned by the driver's bench that had come loose in the crash. Even from 10 feet away, Samuel could see the unnatural stillness in her lower body, the way her fingers clawed at the dirt while her legs remained motionless. "Please," she gasped when she saw him, her voice raw with pain and something else. Fear, but not of him. "Please, my daughter." "She's safe," Samuel said, setting his rifle down slowly. The woman's eyes were green as spring grass flecked with gold that caught even in the dim morning light. Blood seeped from a gash on her forehead, painting half her face crimson. "What's your name?" "Margaret," she managed between shallow breaths. "Margaret Shaw. We were the stage from Denver." The driver said he knew a shortcut. Samuel looked around. No driver in sight. The coward had either run or been thrown clear and fled. Either way, he'd left a woman and child to die. Samuel's jaw tightened. Some things about men never changed, war or no war. "Clara." Margaret called weakly. "Clara, come here, baby." The child ran to her mother, dropping to her knees in the dirt. "Mama, your legs." "Why won't your legs move?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a distant fire. Samuel had seen enough spine injuries to recognize the signs. The way Margaret's body divided at the waist, alive above, dead below. He'd seen men with the same injury begging for water, for their mothers, for death. Most got the third within hours. "We need to get this off you," Samuel said, moving to the wagon. He tested its weight. Heavy, but not impossible. "Girl, Clara, I need you to help." The child looked up at him with those wide eyes, and for a moment Samuel saw another child's face, his son looking up at him the morning he'd left for war. "Be brave for Mama," he'd said then. The words came out now before he could stop them. "Be brave for your Mama, Clara." The girl nodded, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. Together, they managed to lift the bench enough for Samuel to pull Margaret free. She screamed once, a sound that sent birds fleeing from nearby trees, then went limp, still breathing, but unconscious. Samuel checked her over with practiced hands. The legs were the obvious problem, but there was more. Old bruises on her arms, yellowed and healing. Scars on her hands that didn't come from farm work. This woman had been running from something or someone long before this morning's catastrophe. "Is Mama going to die?" Clara's voice was small, barely a whisper. Samuel looked at the child, really looked at her. She had her mother's eyes, but something else too. A steadiness that didn't belong in someone so young. This girl had seen too much already. "Not if I can help it," he said, and surprised himself by meaning it. He'd sworn after Mary and James that he'd never care for another soul. But here, he was lifting a broken woman into his arms, feeling the weight of her life settling against his chest. Margaret stirred slightly, her head rolling against his shoulder. Up close, he could see she was younger than he'd first thought. 26, maybe 27. Too young to have eyes that old. "The bad men," she mumbled, still mostly unconscious. "Can't let them find us. Can't let them take Clara." Samuel's grip tightened. Bad men. There were always bad men. During the war, after the war, probably until Judgment Day. But these two wouldn't face them alone. Not anymore. As he carried Margaret toward his ranch, Clara trailing behind, clutching her mother's torn travel bag, Samuel felt something shift in his chest. The grave he'd just filled seemed less like an ending now. Thunder was gone. Yes, but perhaps the old horse had stayed alive just long enough to get Samuel here to this moment, to this crossroads between his old ghosts and whatever salvation might still be possible. The sun finally broke through the mist as they reached his gate, painting the landscape gold and red like a promise or a warning. In his arms, Margaret's breathing steadied. Behind him, Clara's small feet made determined sounds in the dirt. And somewhere not far enough away, the bad men she'd spoken of were probably already following their trail, drawn by the crashed wagon like vultures to carrion. But that was a problem for later. Right now, Samuel had a woman to save and a child to protect. The war had taught him how to bury the dead. Perhaps it was time to learn how to save the living. The inside of Samuel's cabin was darker than Margaret expected, darker than the pain that swam through her vision, like black fish in muddy water. She came to consciousness slowly aware, first of warmth, then of the strange stillness in her legs, and finally of Clara's voice somewhere nearby, talking to someone in that careful way she'd learned to use around strangers. "My mama used to help soldiers," Clara was saying. "Before the bad men came. She fixed them up real good, even when they screamed." Margaret tried to speak, but her throat felt filled with sand. The effort must have made some sound, though, because suddenly Clara was there, her small face swimming into focus. "Mama, the man says you're going to be okay. He says you just need rest." The man. Margaret turned her head, neck muscles protesting, and found him sitting in a chair near the fire. Samuel, he'd said his name was. In the flickering light, she could make out a face carved by weather and worse things. Deep lines around eyes the color of winter sky. A scar that ran from his left temple down into his beard. Hands that rested on his knees, still but ready, the way soldiers' hands always were. "Water," she managed to croak. He rose, smoothly poured from a pitcher on the table. When he helped her drink, his hands were gentler than she'd expected. She'd known too many men whose gentleness was just violence waiting for an excuse. But this felt different, practiced, like he'd done this before. How long, she asked when the water had cleared her throat. 2 days. You've been in and out. Fever broke this morning. 2 days. They'd been stopped 2 days. Marcus would have heard about the crashed stage by now. He'd be looking. He was always looking. We need to leave, Margaret said, trying to push herself up. Nothing happened below her waist. The realization hit her again, fresh as the first time. Her legs were gone. Not gone, but might as well be. Dead weight, attached to a living body. You're not going anywhere, Samuel said quietly. Not for a while. You don't understand. There are men. My husband. Former husband. Marcus Shaw, Samuel said, and Margaret's blood turned to ice. Union cavalry, court-martialed for selling intelligence to Confederate spies, escaped custody 3 months ago. Margaret stared at him. How do you... Samuel walked to a shelf, pulled down a folded newspaper. Been following the story. Man who'd sell out his own side for gold would do anything. He paused, studying her face. Including hurt his wife for knowing too much. The shame burned through her like fever. I didn't know. Not at first. When I found out when I tried to leave the first time. She touched her ribs unconsciously, remembering the boot that had cracked them. He said if I ever told anyone he'd kill Clara. Said she wasn't really his anyway, that no one would miss a bastard child. Is she... Samuel asked, no judgment in his voice. No, she's his. Has his eyes when she's angry. But he never wanted children. Said they were liabilities in his line of work. Margaret laughed bitterly. Turns out we were all liabilities. Clara had curled up on a pile of blankets near the fire, finally asleep. In repose, her face lost its careful watchfulness, became the child she should have been allowed to be. After he escaped, Margaret continued, he came for us, said we were his insurance, that if they caught him, he could trade information about me for leniency, information he'd planted. Her hands clenched in the quilt. He made me steal medical supplies from the field hospital where I worked, made it look like I was selling them. If he goes down, he's taking me with him. Samuel was quiet for a long moment. Then, you were at Chancellorsville. It wasn't a question. Margaret looked at him sharply. How did you... He pulled his shirt aside, revealing a mass of scar tissue along his ribs. May 3rd, 1863. Grape shot took out most of my unit. Field hospital near the Chancellor House. There was a nurse. Wouldn't leave even when they started shelling the hospital tents. She stayed with me for 6 hours, keeping pressure on the wounds while the battle raged around us. Margaret's breath caught. She remembered that day, remembered the soldier who'd quoted Psalms through his delirium, who'd called for his wife with such desperate longing that she'd held his hand and pretended to be her. Mary, she whispered. You kept calling for Mary. My wife. His voice was steady as stone. She'd been dead 2 months by then. Confederate raiders hit our farm while I was gone. He gestured toward a daguerreotype on the mantel. A woman with kind eyes holding a small boy. I was fighting to preserve the Union while the war was destroying everything I was fighting for. The silence stretched between them, filled with the weight of shared loss. Finally, Margaret spoke. Why did you save us? You could have left us there. No one would have known. Samuel looked at the fire for a long moment. Maybe because I'm tired of watching people die. Maybe because your daughter has the same look my boy had, that way of being brave when the world's falling apart. He stood, adding a log to the fire. Or maybe because I recognized someone else the war broke but didn't quite kill. The war didn't break my legs, Margaret said. No, but it broke everything else, didn't it? Made you vulnerable to men like Marcus. Made you think you deserved what he did to you. The truth of it hit her like cold water. She turned her face away, but not before he saw the tears. I can't stay here, she said. When he finds us. If he finds you, Samuel corrected. This territory's bigger than most eastern states. Lot of places for a man to disappear if he's not welcome. You don't know Marcus. He's connected. Has friends from the war men who owe him favors. I have friends too, Samuel said quietly. Men who rode with me from Bull Run to Bentonville. Men who've seen what I've seen and understand that some fights don't end at Appomattox. Before Margaret could respond, horses sounded outside. Multiple horses moving fast. Samuel was at the window, instantly rifle in hand. Margaret's heart hammered as she tried to drag herself toward Clara. "Stay down," Samuel ordered, his voice carrying the authority of command. He checked his rifle, then surprisingly set it aside. "It's all right. These are friends." The door opened to reveal 3 men, all bearing the weathered look of former soldiers. The tallest, a black man with sergeant's stripes still visible on his worn jacket, spoke first. "Samuel, we heard about the crashed stage. Came to see if you needed help." "Isaiah," Samuel greeted him. "Tom Patrick. Appreciate you coming." Isaiah's eyes found Margaret took in her condition with a medic's assessment. "Ma'am, I was a medical orderly with the 54th Massachusetts. Mind if I check your injuries?" Margaret nodded, suddenly exhausted. As Isaiah examined her with professional efficiency, the other men spoke quietly with Samuel near the door. She caught fragments. Riders asking questions in town. Description matches. Might be trouble coming. "It's as I thought," Isaiah said, gently drawing her attention back. "Spines damaged but not severed. Seen men walk again from worse with time and care." He looked at Samuel. "She'll need proper nursing, daily exercises. It won't be easy." "Nothing worth doing ever is," Samuel replied. Tom, a wiry man with red hair going gray, cleared his throat. "There's something else. Stage companies saying the woman stole those mail sacks. Federal marshals are getting involved." "That's a lie," Clara said from her blankets, suddenly awake and fierce. "Mama didn't steal nothing. The bad men are lying again." Patrick, the youngest of the 3, knelt beside her. "We know, little one. Sometimes bad men lie to make good people look guilty." Margaret felt the walls closing in. Marcus had planned this perfectly. Even if she ran, she'd be running as a criminal now. A paralyzed criminal with a child. "We'll handle it," Samuel said with such certainty that everyone looked at him. "Isaiah, can you stay help with the medical care? Tom Patrick, I need you to get word to Colonel Morrison at Fort Collins. Tell him Samuel Travis is calling in that favor from Spotsylvania." The men nodded, understanding, passing between them in the way of soldiers who'd shared battlefields. After they left, Samuel sat beside Margaret's bed. "Morrison commands the federal troops in this region. He owes me his life and his commission. When I explain the situation, the charges will disappear." "Why?" Margaret asked again. "Why would you do this for strangers?" Samuel looked at Clara, who had crept closer to her mother, then at the daguerreotype on the mantel. "Because I've spent 5 years learning how to die slowly. Maybe it's time to remember how to live." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like restless spirits. But inside, the fire burned steady, holding back the dark. Isaiah worked quietly, preparing poultices and medicines from his saddlebags. Clara held her mother's hand, humming a lullaby Margaret had taught her in happier times. And Samuel stood watch by the window rifle close at hand, guarding these broken strangers who'd crashed into his solitude like angels falling from heaven or demons fleeing hell. He wasn't sure which yet. But for the first time in 5 years, he felt something besides the patient wait for death. He felt purpose. The night deepened around the cabin, bringing with it the distant howl of wolves and the nearer sound of Clara's peaceful breathing. Margaret watched Samuel's silhouette against the window, this stranger who'd taken them in without question, who knew her shame and offered shelter anyway. "Samuel," she called softly. He turned his face unreadable in the darkness. "Thank you." He nodded once, then returned to his vigil, but she thought she saw something ease in his shoulders, some burden slightly lifted. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Marcus would keep hunting. The marshals would ask questions. Her legs might never work again, but tonight, in this cabin that smelled of wood smoke and safety, Margaret allowed herself something she hadn't felt in years: hope. The nightmares came for Samuel first, as they always did when the wind turned cold and carried the smell of coming snow. But this time, they were different. Instead of Mary's face in the flames, he saw Margaret. Instead of his son James calling for him, it was Clara's voice cutting through the smoke. He woke with a start sweat cooling on his skin to find Clara standing beside his cot in the pre-dawn darkness. She held a cup of water in her small hands, offering it silently. "You were calling out," she said simply. "Mama does that too sometimes." Samuel took the water, his hand still trembling slightly. "Sorry if I woke you." "I don't sleep much anyway." Clara settled onto the floor beside his cot, pulling her knees to her chest. "The bad men might come at night. Someone has to watch." The weight of that statement from a 7-year-old child hit Samuel harder than any Confederate artillery ever had. He set the cup aside, studying her in the dim light from the banked fire. "That's my job now," he said, "watching. You can sleep." Clara shook her head. "That's what Papa said too, before he became one of the bad men." From across the room, Margaret stirred. Clara let Mr. Travis rest. "I'm awake anyway," Samuel said, rising from the cot. He added wood to the fire, coaxing it back to life. The flames threw dancing shadows on the walls, and for a moment, just a moment, he saw other shadows there, ghosts of the past that never quite left. "Tell me about the war," Clara said suddenly. "Mama won't. She says I'm too young, but I already know about bad things." Samuel looked at Margaret, who had managed to prop herself up on her elbows. She nodded slightly, resignation in her eyes. "War's not a story for children," Samuel began, then stopped. This child had already seen too much to be protected by pretty lies. "But you're right. You know about bad things already." He sat in his chair, the one that had been Mary's once. "What do you want to know? Why did you fight?" The question every soldier faced, and few could answer. Samuel thought for a moment. "I fought because I believed in something, in the idea that all men should be free, that the Union should stand." He paused. "But mostly I fought because when the war came, not fighting seemed like letting evil win without a contest." "Did you kill people?" Margaret made a sound of protest, but Samuel raised a hand gently. The child deserved truth. "Yes. I killed men who were probably good men fighting for what they believed in. Men with families. Men who were scared." He met Clara's eyes. "Killing changes a person, Clara. Every time it takes a piece of your soul, you never get back." "Papa killed people too," Clara said quietly. "But he liked it. I could tell. He'd come home smiling after." The fire popped, sending sparks up the chimney. Margaret's breathing was shallow, pained. Not from her injuries, Samuel realized, but from memories. "Not all soldiers are soldiers," Samuel said carefully. "Some are just killers who found a uniform." "Which were you?" "I tried to be a soldier, but by the end..." He thought of the last months of the war, the march through Georgia, the things they'd done in the name of victory. "By the end, I'm not sure any of us knew what we were anymore." Margaret spoke then, her voice stronger than it had been in days. "He was at Chancellorsville, in the medical tent. I remember because while other men screamed or cursed or prayed, he recited poetry." Samuel felt heat rise to his face. "Whitman. My wife loved Whitman." "I hear America singing," Margaret quoted softly. "The varied carols I hear. You said it over and over like a prayer. Mary used to read it to James at bedtime." The words came out rough. "Said it was about all the different people making one song together. About harmony." Clara moved to her mother's bedside, taking her hand. "Sing for me, Mama." Margaret's eyes glistened. "I can't, baby. My voice isn't." "Please." And so Margaret sang, her voice thin but true, an old hymn about crossing rivers and finding home. Samuel closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him. For a moment, Mary's voice seemed to join Margaret's, harmonizing across the veil between living and dead. When the song ended, Isaiah entered from the lean-to where he'd been sleeping, carrying his medical supplies. "Time for morning exercises," he said gently to Margaret. "The nerves need reminding what they're supposed to do." As Isaiah worked with Margaret, carefully moving her legs through their range of motion, Samuel took Clara outside to tend the chickens. The morning was crisp frost, coating the grass like nature's own artillery powder. "Mr. Travis," Clara said, scattering feed for the birds, "do you think Mama will walk again? Isaiah knows his business. If anyone can help her, he can. But do you think she will?" Samuel watched the chickens pecking at the ground, simple creatures with simple needs. "I think your mama's the strongest person I've met since the war. If walking again is possible, she'll do it." "She was strong before," Clara said quietly. "Before Papa broke her." The words hung in the cold air. Samuel knelt beside the child, his knees protesting the movement. "Listen to me, Clara. What your father did, that's on him. Not her. Not you. Bad men break things because they're already broken inside. It's not about strength or weakness. It's about evil choosing to be evil." Clara nodded solemnly, then surprised him by throwing her arms around his neck. The embrace lasted only a moment before she pulled back, embarrassed, and ran toward the cabin. Samuel remained kneeling in the frost, feeling the ghost of small arms around his neck. James had hugged him like that the morning he'd left for war, fierce and quick, as if trying to hold on and let go at the same time. When he returned to the cabin, he found Tom's horse tied outside. The man himself was inside, speaking quietly with Isaiah, while Margaret listened, her face pale. "Marcus Shaw's been spotted," Tom said without preamble when Samuel entered. "Town called Prosperity, about 40 miles north. He's got 6 men with him. They're asking about a woman and child who might have been on the Denver stage." 40 miles, Samuel calculated. 2 days if they're searching carefully. "Day and a half if they get lucky," Tom corrected. "Samuel, these aren't just hired guns. 2 of them are Coleman brothers. Remember them from the war?" Samuel's jaw tightened. He remembered Confederate guerrillas who'd kept fighting after Lee surrendered, robbing and killing across Missouri until they disappeared west. "They're bounty hunters now," Tom continued. "Legal killers. And word is, Marcus has promised them a good prize for finding his family." Margaret made a sound like a wounded animal. "We'll leave. Now. Today." "You can't travel," Isaiah said firmly. "Not for at least another week. Moving you now could cause permanent paralysis." "Better paralyzed than dead," Margaret said. "Better Clara orphaned than in Marcus's hands." "No one's dying," Samuel said with quiet authority. "And no one's running." He walked to the chest in the corner, pulled out an oilcloth bundle. Inside was his army colt, cleaned and loaded, and something else. A medal on a faded ribbon, the Medal of Honor they'd given him after Spotsylvania, when he'd held a position alone for 3 hours against a Confederate brigade. "Tom, I need you to ride to Fort Collins, fast as you can. Give this to Morrison." He handed over the medal. "Tell him I'm calling in everything he owes me. I need a squad of cavalry here within 2 days." Tom took the medal reverently. "That's your honor, Samuel, your proof of service." "It's medal and ribbon," Samuel replied. "These people are flesh and blood." After Tom left, Samuel began preparations. He cleaned and loaded every weapon he owned, set up defensive positions around the cabin, taught Clara how to reload cartridges, her small fingers surprisingly steady with the task. Margaret watched it all from her bed, tears sliding silently down her cheeks. "This isn't your fight." "It became my fight the moment I pulled you from that wreck," Samuel replied, checking the sight on his Springfield. "Maybe before that. Maybe it became my fight the day I came home to ashes and couldn't do anything but bury what was left." That night, as they ate a simple dinner of beans and cornbread, Clara asked, "Will you teach me to shoot?" "No," Margaret said quickly. "Yes," Samuel said at the same time. They looked at each other across the table. Margaret's green eyes flashed with anger, the first real fire he'd seen in them. She's 7 years old. She's 7 years old in a world where bad men come in the night, Samuel countered. Knowing how to defend herself might save her life someday, or curse her to a life of violence. Only if she chooses it. Knowledge isn't corruption, Margaret. It's power. They held each other's gaze for a long moment. Finally, Margaret looked away. Not tonight. She needs to be a child for a few more days. Samuel nodded, accepting the compromise. But after Clara went to sleep, he showed her mother how to load and fire the Colt from her position in bed. Margaret's hands shook at first, but her aim was true. "I was a doctor's daughter before I was a nurse," she said, sighting down the barrel. "He taught me anatomy. I know where to shoot to stop a man quick." "And would you, to protect Clara?" Margaret's eyes went hard as flint. "To protect Clara, I'd shoot God himself." Outside, a wolf howled long and mournful. Others answered a chorus of predators in the darkness. Samuel stood by the window, watching the moonlit landscape for any sign of movement. "They're coming," Margaret said. It wasn't a question. Yes. And Morrison's men might not get here in time. No. She was quiet for a moment. "Then, at Chancellorsville, when you were delirious, you said something else besides the poetry." Samuel waited. "You said, 'The only way through hell is straight through the middle.'" He turned from the window to look at her. In the firelight, she looked like a painting of some warrior goddess, broken but undefeated. "That's what this is, isn't it?" she continued. "Hell catching up to us." "Maybe," Samuel admitted. "But this time we're not going through it alone." Isaiah entered, then having completed his watch circuit. "All quiet, but there's smoke on the northern horizon. Campfires, probably." They all knew what that meant. Marcus and his men settling in for the night, preparing for tomorrow's hunt. Samuel checked his weapons one more time, then did something he hadn't done in 5 years. He pulled out Mary's Bible from the shelf, opened it to the Psalms. "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." He read aloud, his voice steady in the flickering light. "I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Margaret continued, surprising him. "Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies." Clara stirred in her sleep, murmuring something unintelligible. Isaiah stood guard at the window, and Samuel and Margaret sat in the darkness, two broken soldiers preparing for one more battle, finding comfort in ancient words and the knowledge that whatever came with the dawn, they would face it together. The ghosts of their past seemed to crowd into the cabin. Mary and James, the men Samuel had killed the patients. Margaret couldn't save all the casualties of a war that had ended in name, but never in spirit. But tonight, those ghosts felt less like haunts and more like reinforcements gathering for the battle to come. The recognition came like a bullet through time, sharp and sudden and devastating. Margaret had been watching Samuel clean his rifle in the afternoon light, noting the methodical way his hands moved the particular angle he held his head when concentrating. Something nagged at her, a memory trying to surface through the muddy waters of trauma and time. Then he shifted, and the light caught his profile just right, and she knew. "Petersburg," she whispered the word, falling from her lips like a stone into still water. Samuel's hand stilled on the rifle. He didn't look up, but she saw the tension ripple through his shoulders. "The crater," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "July 30th, 1864. You carried me out." Now he did look up, his blue eyes meeting hers with an intensity that took her breath away. "You were the nurse, the one who stayed when the colored troops were trapped." The memory crashed over her in waves. The explosion that had torn a hole in the Confederate lines, the Union soldiers pouring into the crater, thinking they'd broken through. The Confederate counterattack that turned the crater into a slaughterhouse. And through it all, a young nurse who disobeyed direct orders to retreat, staying to tend the wounded black soldiers that others had abandoned. They were shooting the colored troops even when they tried to surrender. Margaret said, her hands clenching in the quilt. The officers ordered us to leave them, said they weren't worth risking white lives for. But you stayed. They were men. They were dying. How could I not stay? Samuel set the rifle aside, moved to sit in the chair beside her bed. I was with the unit sent to extract survivors. My commander said to only bring out the white wounded. I disobeyed. You saved 17 men that day, Margaret said. 17 colored soldiers who would have died in that pit. I kept count. 18, Samuel corrected quietly. I saved 18. You were the last one I carried out. The memory sharpened. She'd been trying to stop a soldier's bleeding when the shell hit. Shrapnel had torn through her shoulder and side. She remembered falling, remembered thinking she would die there among the men she'd tried to save. Then strong arms lifting her, a voice saying, "Hold on, miss, just hold on." "You could have been court-martialed," she said. "You could have been killed." He paused. "Why did you really stay?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, watching Clara help Isaiah prepare medical supplies at the table. "My brother was with the 54th Massachusetts. Different battle, but same war. He wrote me letters about how they were treated, even by their own side. When I saw those men in the crater, I thought, what if someone somewhere was making the same choice about Thomas? What if staying or leaving meant my brother's life? Did he survive the war? Died at Fort Wagner, but he died fighting, not abandoned in a hole." She met Samuel's eyes. "You had a limp that day at the crater. Your left leg." Samuel unconsciously rubbed his thigh. "Shrapnel at Gettysburg, mostly healed by Petersburg, but still stiff. Isaiah actually treated it in the field hospital." "Small world," Isaiah commented from the table, not looking up from his work. "Or maybe just a small war for all its bigness." Clara abandoned her task, drawn by the conversation. "You knew each other before, in the war." "We crossed paths," Samuel said carefully. "Your mama was brave, braver than most soldiers." "She still is," Clara said firmly, then looked at her mother. "Tell me about the crater." "It's not a story for children," Margaret began, but Clara interrupted. "Neither is Papa trying to kill us, but that happened anyway." The blunt truth of it silenced them all for a moment. Finally, Margaret began to speak, telling a sanitized version of that hellish day. But even sanitized, the horror came through. Clara listened with that too adult attention she'd developed, processing the world's cruelty with a child's adaptability. "So Mr. Samuel saved you," Clara said when the story ended. "And now he's saving us again." "Seems to be a habit," Isaiah observed dryly. "Man can't help himself when it comes to lost causes." "We're not lost," Clara said indignantly. "No," Samuel agreed, looking at Margaret. "Not lost, just taking the long way home." A comfortable silence settled over them, the kind that comes when truth has been spoken and accepted. Then Margaret noticed something, a detail that had been nagging at her since she'd first woken in the cabin. "The medicine Isaiah's been giving me, it's not standard. It's—" She paused, recognizing the taste she'd been trying to place. "It's the same mixture Dr. Hammond developed, the experimental one for spinal injuries." Isaiah and Samuel exchanged glances. "You knew Hammond?" Isaiah asked. "He trained me. Before the war, when he was still practicing in Philadelphia, he was working on treatments for paralysis caused by trauma." She looked at Isaiah with new understanding. "You knew him too." "I studied under him after the war," Isaiah admitted. "When he was discharged from the Surgeon General position, he took on students the medical establishment wouldn't normally train." "Black students," Margaret said. "And women," Isaiah added with a meaningful look. He mentioned a particularly talented female student who'd gone on to serve as a nurse. Said she had the instincts of a surgeon, but the world wasn't ready for that. Margaret felt tears prick her eyes. "He said that—" "He did. Also said she disappeared after the war." "Something about a bad marriage." Isaiah's expression darkened. "He'd have had words about Marcus Shaw, I think." "He'd have had more than words," Margaret said with bitter humor. "Dr. Hammond didn't suffer fools or villains." Samuel had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke. You were training to be a doctor. It wasn't a question, but Margaret answered anyway. I was, before Marcus, before the world reminded me of my place. She looked at her useless legs. And now you have knowledge that could help you walk again, Isaiah said firmly. Between what I know and what you know, we might just work a miracle. Miracles, Margaret said softly, then looked at Samuel. Like three people who crossed paths in the war's worst moments, finding each other again in Colorado territory. Maybe not a miracle, Samuel said. Maybe just balance. The war took so much from all of us. Maybe this is the universe giving something back. Claire had been drawing on a piece of paper Isaiah had given her, but now she held it up. It showed crude figures, but the meaning was clear. 4 people standing together, hands linked facing a group of dark shapes approaching from the edge of the paper. This is us, she said, pointing to the linked figures. And those are the bad men. But see, we're together. They're not. Before anyone could respond, the sound of horses approached fast. Samuel was at the window, instantly rifle ready. But then he relaxed. It's Patrick. The young veteran entered, quickly, dust still settling on his clothes. They're closer than we thought. Marcus and 8 men now, not 6. They'll be here by dawn. 8, Samuel calculated. The Coleman brothers must have brought friends. There's more, Patrick said, pulling out a folded paper. This was posted in town. Samuel unfolded it, his expression darkening. Margaret couldn't see it from the bed, but she could read his face. What is it? He brought the paper to her. It was a wanted poster, her face sketched with reasonable accuracy. Margaret Shaw, it read, wanted for theft of federal property and suspicion of treason. Reward $500. He's making it legal, she said numbly. Anyone can kill me now and claim bounty. Not in my house, Samuel said with quiet fury. Not on my land. Samuel, Patrick said urgently. There's one more thing. Morrison's cavalry won't make it. They're dealing with an Apache raid south of the fort. Tom's riding to gather more of our boys, but they won't get here in time either, Samuel finished. The room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. 4 adults and a child against 8 killers. The odds were impossible. We could fort up, Isaiah suggested. Make them come to us. They'll burn us out, Samuel said. It's what I do. Then we run, Margaret said, though the words tasted like ash. You and Isaiah take Clara, get her somewhere safe. No, Clara's voice was fierce. I won't leave you, Mama. And I won't run, Samuel said simply. Not again. I ran once when I should have stayed, when I should have been home to protect my family. I won't make that mistake twice. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a sensation she hadn't experienced in years. It took her a moment to recognize it as hope. Not hope for survival necessarily, but hope that whatever came, she wouldn't face it alone. Then we make our stand, she said. Together. Samuel nodded, then surprised them all by taking Margaret's hand. His fingers were calloused, but gentle warm against her skin. Margaret, there's something I need to say. In case. He paused, searching for words. You asked why I saved you. The truth is, I think you saved me. When I pulled you from that wagon, I was just going through the motions of living. But you and Clara, you've reminded me why living matters. Margaret's throat tightened. Samuel. Let me finish. I know we've only known each other a few days. I know you're still healing inside and out, but I also know that I haven't felt this alive since before the war, since before I lost everything. He squeezed her hand gently. I'm not asking for anything. I just needed you to know. Margaret turned her hand in his, interlacing their fingers. At the crater, when you were carrying me out, you said something. You probably don't remember. You said, I've got you. I won't let go. Samuel's breath caught. You kept that promise then. Margaret continued, and I believe you'll keep it now. Clara moved between them, placing her small hands over their joined ones. "Does this mean we're a family now?" The question hung in the air like a blessing or a curse. Before anyone could answer, Isaiah cleared his throat. "If we're going to be a family, we'd better be a smart one. I have an idea." They spent the next hours preparing. Isaiah revealed knowledge of explosives gained from a former slave who'd worked in the coal mines. Patrick contributed his sharpshooting skills. Even Clara had a role preparing bandages with steady hands. As the night deepened, Samuel stood watch while Margaret dozed fitfully. Claire had curled up beside her mother, one small hand resting protectively on Margaret's arm. They looked peaceful. Isaiah observed quietly, joining Samuel at the window. "They deserve peace," Samuel replied. "They both do. And you. What do you deserve?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Redemption, maybe. A second chance." He looked at the sleeping woman and child. "Or maybe just the opportunity to do right by someone, even if it's too late for the ones I failed." "It's never too late," Isaiah said. "That's what Dr. Hammond used to say. As long as we're breathing, it's never too late to choose differently." Outside in the distance, a coyote howled. Or perhaps it wasn't a coyote at all, but a signal between hunters closing in on their prey. Samuel checked his weapons again, feeling the weight of the coming dawn. "Isaiah," he said quietly, "if something happens to me, I'll get them out," Isaiah promised. Both of them. "And if something happens to all of us," Isaiah pulled out a letter from his pocket. "Already written. Tom has instructions to send this to Dr. Hammond. He has connections people who could protect Clara. Make sure she gets educated, has a chance." Samuel nodded, then noticed Margaret's eyes were open watching them. "How long have you been awake?" he asked. "Long enough." She struggled to sit up, and Samuel moved to help her, his arm supporting her back. "I need you both to promise me something. If Marcus gets past you, if he gets to me, don't let Clara see. Whatever he does, don't let her see." "He won't get past us," Samuel said firmly. "But if he does, then I'll kill him myself," Clara said from where she lay. They'd thought she was asleep, but her eyes were wide open, fierce with a child's pure rage. "I'll kill him for hurting you, Mama, for making us run, for being bad." Margaret pulled her daughter close, pressing her face into Clara's hair. "Oh, my brave girl, my brave, brave girl." Samuel met Isaiah's eyes over their heads. Tomorrow would bring blood one way or another, but tonight, in this cabin that had become a fortress, they were together. A soldier, a nurse, a medic, and a child bound by circumstance and choice, facing the dawn as a makeshift family forged in crisis. The first hints of light appeared on the eastern horizon, painting the sky the color of old blood. Somewhere out there, Marcus Shaw and his men were mounting up, preparing for what they thought would be an easy capture. They were wrong. "They're coming," Patrick called softly from his position at the north window. Samuel squeezed Margaret's hand once more, then moved to his position. "Remember the plan. Nobody shoots until I do." "And if they want to talk?" Isaiah asked. Samuel checked the load in his army Colt. "Then we talk. But men like Marcus Shaw don't come to talk. They come to take." The sun broke the horizon, flooding the cabin with golden light. In that light, Margaret saw Samuel clearly not as the broken man she'd first thought, but as someone who'd found his purpose again. Someone who'd chosen to stand between danger and those who couldn't stand themselves. "Samuel," she called. He turned. "That promise you made at the crater about not letting go, yes, I'm holding you to it." He smiled, then the first real smile she'd seen from him. It transformed his face, showing the man he must have been before the war carved sorrow into his features. "Yes, ma'am." And then there was no more time for words. The horses were coming dark shapes against the morning light, bringing with them the reckoning that had been building since the day Margaret had defied her husband and run with their child into the uncertain embrace of the western frontier. The war might have ended at Appomattox, but for the people in that cabin, the battle for survival, for family, for the right to choose their own destiny was just beginning. Marcus Shaw sat his horse like a conquering general, even though his uniform had been stripped from him months ago. The morning sun caught the silver in his hair, premature aging from years of schemes and violence. His men spread out in a semicircle around the cabin, each one a killer with legal sanction. "Margaret," his voice carried across the dusty yard, smooth as whiskey and twice as poisonous. "I know you're in there. Come out now, and I might forget what you've put me through." Inside the cabin, Margaret gripped the Colt Samuel had given her, her knuckles white. Clara pressed against her side, trembling, but silent. "He's lying," Clara whispered. "He always lies." Samuel stood at the window, rifle steady. "Patrick, you got a clear shot on the Coleman brothers. Clear as day." Patrick confirmed from his position. "Isaiah." "Ready with the surprise," Isaiah replied from near the door where he'd rigged his explosive device. "Margaret," Marcus called again. "You're wanted by federal law now. Theft, treason, abandonment of a child. Oh yes, I've added that one too. Said you left Clara in Denver while you ran with stolen government property. Any court will give me custody now." Margaret made a sound like a wounded animal. Samuel moved to her side quickly. "He's trying to break you before the fight," he said quietly. "Don't let him." "But if it's true, if he's made it legal—" "Legal doesn't mean right," Samuel said firmly. "And I've got something he doesn't expect." Before Margaret could ask what, Samuel opened the door and stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but pointed down. "Marcus Shaw," he called out. "Captain Samuel Travis, 14th Connecticut Infantry. You're trespassing on my land." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "Captain Travis, the war hero. I heard about you. Medal of Honor at Spotsylvania, wasn't it? How the mighty have fallen harboring fugitives." "The only fugitive I see is you," Samuel replied calmly. "Court-martialed for treason, escaped from military custody. There's still a warrant for your arrest from the War Department. That warrant's been superseded by new charges against my wife." "She's not your wife," Samuel said. "I married her yesterday." The lie came out smooth as truth, and Samuel saw it hit Marcus like a physical blow. The man's face went red, then white. "That's impossible. We're still legally married." "You were declared dead when you escaped custody." Samuel continued building the fiction with military precision. "Death in absentia. It's a legal principle. Margaret was free to remarry." Margaret, listening from inside, felt her heart racing. The lie was brilliant, giving her legal protection she didn't actually have, but it also painted a target on Samuel's back. "You're lying," Marcus snarled. "Telegraph the courthouse in Denver," Samuel said with a shrug. "The certificate was filed yesterday morning." One of the Coleman brothers, the older one with the scarred face, spoke up. "This changes things, Shaw. We were hired to retrieve your wife. If she ain't your wife." "She's still wanted for theft," Marcus said quickly. "Is she—" Samuel pulled out a piece of paper from his pocket. "This telegram from Colonel Morrison at Fort Collins says otherwise. Seems the stage company made an error. No theft occurred. The federal marshals have withdrawn all charges." The paper was actually a supply requisition, but at this distance, none of them could read it. "Even if that's true," Marcus said, his composure cracking, "Clara is still my daughter." "Is she?" Samuel asked. "Because I have testimony from Dr. Hammond in Philadelphia that says you repeatedly claimed the child wasn't yours, that you accused your wife of infidelity. Can't have it both ways, Shaw." Margaret watched from the window as Marcus's men exchanged glances. They'd been promised easy money for a legal retrieval. This was becoming complicated. "I want to see my wife," Marcus demanded. "I want to hear from her own mouth that she's chosen this." Samuel was about to refuse when Margaret's voice carried from the doorway. "I'll speak to him." She stood in the doorframe, supported by the crutches Samuel had made Clara beside her. The sight of her broken but unbowed seemed to affect Marcus's men. This wasn't the fleeing criminal they'd been told about. "Hello, Marcus," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Margaret." His voice dropped to that dangerous whisper she remembered too well. "You've made a mistake. Come with me now, and I'll forgive everything." "Forgive?" Margaret laughed, bitter and sharp. "You broke my legs because I found out you were selling information to the Confederates. You beat Clara for crying. You sold medical supplies meant for dying soldiers. What exactly are you forgiving?" "Lies," Marcus said. But his men were listening now, doubt creeping into their faces. "The truth," Margaret countered. "And everyone here knows it, including your hired guns." The younger Coleman brother shifted in his saddle. "Shaw, you said she was a thief and a traitor." "She is—" "No." Clara's voice piped up clear and strong. "He is. I saw him take the papers. I saw him hurt Mama. I saw everything." Marcus's face contorted with rage. "Shut up, you little brat. You'll speak when—" The crack of Samuel's rifle split the morning air. The bullet kicked up dust inches from Marcus's horse's hooves. The animal reared, nearly throwing him. "You'll not speak to my daughter that way," Samuel said, working the rifle's action to chamber another round. "Your daughter—" Marcus had regained control of his horse, his face purple with fury. "Mine by choice," Samuel said, "which is more than you can say." The tension stretched taut as wire. 8 men with guns, their loyalties suddenly uncertain. 4 defenders ready to die for their makeshift family. Then Isaiah stepped out from the side of the cabin, holding something in his hand. "Gentlemen, before this goes any further, you should know I've rigged the cabin with explosives. Enough to turn this whole area into a crater. You fire on us, I drop this switch, and we all meet our maker together." It was mostly a bluff. The explosives were real, but limited, meant to create confusion, not total destruction. But Isaiah sold it with the confidence of a man who'd seen too much to fear death. "You're bluffing," Marcus said, but uncertainty colored his voice. "Am I?" Isaiah smiled grimly. "I learned from Confederate sappers in Petersburg. You remember Petersburg, don't you, Shaw? Where you sold information about our troop movements, got a lot of good men killed." The Coleman brothers were definitely wavering now. "This ain't what we signed up for," the scarred one said. "I'll double your fee," Marcus said desperately. "Dead men don't spend money," the younger Coleman replied. Patrick chose that moment to speak from his position. "Also, gentlemen, I've got a bead on each of you. I can drop 3 before you clear leather. Captain Travis will get 2 more. That leaves 3 of you to charge a fortified position defended by a combat medic with explosives. Anyone like those odds?" The silence that followed was heavy with calculation. Then from the road came the sound of more horses, lots of them. Tom appeared on the ridge, and with him 15 men. All veterans, all armed, all wearing pieces of their old uniforms. Union blue mixed with civilian clothes, but their bearing was unmistakably military. "Captain Travis," Tom called out formally, "the 14th Connecticut Veterans Association received your message. We're here to support our brother-in-arms." Marcus looked around wildly. His 8 men against 20 combat veterans plus the defenders in the cabin. The mathematics of violence had shifted decisively. "This isn't over," he snarled at Margaret. "Yes, it is," Samuel said quietly. "You're going to leave. Now. And you're never coming back." "You can't." "I can." Samuel's voice carried the authority of command. "You're outnumbered, outgunned, and out of legal standing. But more than that, Shaw, you're outclassed. These men fought for something bigger than themselves. You've only ever fought for your own gain." He stepped forward, rifle still ready. "But I'll give you one chance. Single combat. You and me. You win, you leave with your life and never return. I win, same result, but you leave knowing you were beaten by a better man." "Samuel, no." Margaret breathed. Marcus studied Samuel, seeing the slight favor of his left leg, the gray in his hair. "Your old Travis. Wounded. You sure you want to do this?" "I'm sure." Marcus dismounted slowly, handing his reins to one of his men. "Pistols! Fists!" Samuel said, setting his rifle aside. "Like men, not murderers." They met in the space between the cabin and the mounted men. Marcus was younger, uninjured, trained in military combat. But Samuel had something Marcus didn't purpose beyond himself. The fight was brutal and quick. Marcus came in confident, throwing a haymaker that would have felled most men. Samuel slipped it his bad leg, making him slower, but not slow enough. His fist connected with Marcus's ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Marcus recovered, landed a blow that split Samuel's lip. Blood spattered the dusty ground, but Samuel had been hit harder by Confederate artillery. He kept coming, methodical, patient. "You're defending damaged goods," Marcus gasped between punches. "A crippled woman and another man's bastard." Samuel's response was a combination that dropped Marcus to his knees, a right to the jaw, a left to the temple, and a knee that connected with Marcus's chest as he fell. "I'm defending my family," Samuel said, standing over the fallen man. "And they're worth more than you'll ever be." Marcus tried to rise, but Samuel's boot on his chest kept him down. "Leave. Don't come back. If I see you again, if I hear you've come within 100 miles of them, I'll kill you. Not as a soldier, as a husband and father protecting what's his." The Coleman brothers had already turned their horses. "We're done here," the scarred one said. "Shaw, you're on your own." One by one, the hired guns melted away, leaving Marcus alone in the dust. He struggled to his feet, hatred burning in his eyes. "This isn't over," he said again, but the words were hollow now. "Yes, it is," Margaret said from the porch. She stood tall despite the crutches, Clara beside her, surrounded by 20 men who'd chosen to stand with them. "You're nothing, Marcus. You always were. Just a small man who needed to break others to feel big." Marcus mounted his horse clumsily, his face already swelling from Samuel's fists. He looked back once, and in his eyes was the recognition of complete defeat. Then he rode away, diminishing into the distance until he was just another shadow on the horizon. The veterans stayed for a while, sharing coffee and stories. Several had known Samuel during the war, and they spoke of his courage at Spotsylvania, at Cold Harbor, at battles Margaret had only heard about in dispatches. "You saved my brother at Spotsylvania," one man said to Samuel. He wrote home about the captain who held the line alone so the wounded could be evacuated. "I've owed you a debt ever since." "No debts between soldiers," Samuel replied, but his eyes were warm. As the sun climbed higher, the veterans departed one by one, each shaking Samuel's hand, tipping their hats to Margaret. Tom was the last to leave. "That was a hell of a bluff," he said quietly. "The marriage certificate, the telegram from Morrison." "Who says it was a bluff?" Samuel replied. Tom looked at him sharply. "You mean?" "I mean Morrison's telegram will arrive tomorrow, clearing Margaret of all charges. And as for the marriage," Samuel glanced back at Margaret, who was teaching Clara to play cat's cradle in the doorway. "Sometimes the heart makes promises before the law catches up." After Tom left, a strange quiet settled over the cabin. The crisis had passed, but its ending had created a new beginning, undefined and uncertain. "You didn't have to do that," Margaret said, as Samuel cleaned his split lip at the water basin. "Fight him, claim us." "Yes, I did." He turned to face her. "Margaret, when I said those things about you being my wife, Clara being my daughter, they weren't just tactical lies." Margaret's breath caught. "Samuel, I know it's only been days. I know you're still healing, but I also know that when I thought Marcus might take you away, something in me broke worse than when I lost Mary and James, because losing them was tragedy. Losing you would be choice. My choice to let fear keep me from fighting for something worth having." Clara looked up from her string game. "Does this mean we can stay forever?" Samuel knelt beside her, his bad leg protesting. "Do you want to stay forever?" Clara nodded solemnly. "Mama smiles here. She didn't smile with Papa. And you teach me things without yelling. And Isaiah tells funny stories. And the chickens are nice." "Then you can stay as long as you want," Samuel said. "Forever's a long time," Margaret said softly. Samuel stood, moved to her side. Not long enough, I think. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold, Samuel made his proposal official, not on his knee because his leg wouldn't allow it, but standing beside Margaret as she sat in Mary's old chair, Clara on her lap. I can't offer you much, he said. A small ranch hard work memories that won't quite fade, but I can offer you partnership, respect. A man who'll stand between you and any storm that comes. Margaret reached up, touched his still swollen lip gently. You already gave us that. You gave us home. Is that a yes? That's a we've already chosen each other, Margaret replied. The rest is just paperwork. Clara clapped her hands. We're getting married. We're getting married, Samuel confirmed, and for the first time in 5 years, his smile reached all the way to his eyes. Isaiah, who'd been pretending not to watch from his medical supplies, cleared his throat. About time. I was starting to think I'd have to prescribe something for chronic stubbornness. They laughed, all of them, the sound filling the cabin with warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. Outside, the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. The war was truly over now, not just the one between states, but the one in their hearts. Margaret looked at her makeshift family, a wounded soldier, a brilliant medic, a too-wise child, and herself broken but healing. It wasn't what she'd planned when she'd fled Denver. It was better. It was real. Samuel, she said suddenly, that promise you made at the crater about not letting go. Yes, keep it. Forever, he promised, and meant it. The night settled around them like a benediction, and for the first time in longer than any of them could remember, the future seemed less like a threat and more like a gift waiting to be unwrapped. The first morning of their official engagement dawned with unexpected rain, a blessing in the drought-stricken territory. Samuel woke to find Clara standing at the window, her small hands pressed against the glass, watching the droplets race down the pane. It's like the sky is crying happy tears, she said without turning around. Maybe it is, Samuel replied, rising from his cot. His body protested yesterday's fight with Marcus had awakened old injuries. But there was work to be done. There was always work to be done. Margaret was already awake, propped up in bed with one of Samuel's books. Poetry, he asked, surprised. Your wife's copy of Whitman, she said softly. I hope you don't mind. Mary would have wanted it read. He moved to the stove, starting the morning coffee. She used to say books were meant to be shared, not shelved. She marked passages, Margaret observed, running her finger along an underlined section. I am the poet of the woman the same as the man, and I say it is as great to be a woman as to be a man. She was a suffragist, Samuel said. Believed women should vote, own property, have equal say. He smiled at the memory. Scandalized half of Connecticut with her opinions. I would have liked her, Margaret said. She would have loved you, Samuel replied, then paused. Is it strange talking about her? Margaret considered. No, she's part of who you are. Pretending otherwise would be like pretending you never went to war. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define us. Isaiah entered from his lean-to, shaking rain from his coat. That fence line's going to need reinforcing. This rain's going to wash out the posts if we don't shore them up. I'll help, Clara volunteered immediately. You'll stay inside and help your mother with her exercises, Samuel said firmly. This rain's turned everything to mud. Too dangerous for small feet. Clara's face fell, but she didn't argue. She'd learned that Samuel's no meant no, but it came from care, not cruelty. As Samuel and Isaiah worked outside, Margaret began her daily struggle with her legs. The feeling had been returning slowly, pins and needles at first, then burning pain, then blessed sensation. Isaiah said it was a good sign that the nerves were reconnecting, but good signs could still hurt like hell. Mama, why doesn't it fix faster? Clara asked, watching Margaret grimace as she tried to flex her foot. Bodies heal in their own time, Margaret explained, breathing through the pain. like how seeds don't become flowers overnight. But you're trying so hard. Sometimes trying hard isn't enough. Sometimes we need patience too. Margaret managed to wiggle her toes slightly, a victory that would have seemed insignificant months ago. And help. We need help. Through the window, they could see Samuel and Isaiah working in the rain, their shapes blurred by water running down the glass. Samuel's limp was more pronounced in the mud, but he didn't slow down. "He hurts too," Clara observed. "His leg. But he doesn't complain." Men of his generation were taught that complaining is weakness, Margaret said. "It's not true, but it's what they learned." Is that why Papa never said when he hurt? He just hurt other people instead. The insight was too sharp for a 7-year-old, but then Clara had been forced to grow up too fast. Margaret pulled her daughter close. Maybe. Hurt people often hurt people, but Samuel's different. He carries his pain without passing it on. They watched as Samuel slipped in the mud, caught himself, and kept working. Isaiah said something that made him laugh, the sound carrying even through the rain. "He laughs more now," Clara said, "since we came." We all do, Margaret realized, and it was true. Even with the threat of Marcus barely past, even with her legs still mostly useless, even with all the uncertainty ahead, there was laughter in this cabin that had been absent from her life for years. The men came in for lunch soaked and muddy but satisfied. The fence was secure. As they ate the simple meal of beans and cornbread, Isaiah brought up a delicate subject. "Your marriage," he said to Samuel and Margaret. "You'll want to make it legal soon, before anyone can question it." "The nearest judge is in Denver," Samuel said. 3 days' ride in good weather." "I can't travel that far yet," Margaret said, frustration evident in her voice. "Then we bring the judge here," Isaiah suggested. "Judge Thompson owes me a favor, saved his son from gangrene after a farming accident. He'll come if I ask." "When?" Samuel asked. "Give me 2 weeks to get word to him, and for him to travel here. That gives Margaret more time to heal, and us time to prepare properly." "Prepare?" Clara asked excitedly. "Like a real wedding." The adults exchanged glances. None of them had thought beyond the legal necessity to the actual ceremony. "A small one," Margaret said carefully. "Simple." "But with a dress," Clara persisted. "And flowers and cake." "Clara," Margaret began, but Samuel interrupted. "Yes," he said firmly. "With all of those things." Margaret looked at him in surprise. "Samuel, we don't need—" "Maybe we do," he said. "Maybe we need to mark this properly, not just as a legal arrangement, but as a choice. A celebration." "Who would come?" Margaret asked. "We barely know anyone." "Tom and his wife, Patrick, the other veterans who came yesterday." Samuel counted on his fingers. "Martha from the neighboring ranch, Doc Wilson from town if Isaiah can convince him." "That's already more people than I've had care about me in years," Margaret said softly. Over the following days, the cabin transformed. Clara threw herself into wedding preparations with the enthusiasm of a child who'd never had anything to celebrate. She picked wild flowers every morning, experimenting with arrangements. She practiced walking slowly the way she'd seen in a picture book, once preparing to be a flower girl. Samuel, meanwhile, worked on something in secret in the barn. When Margaret asked, he just smiled and said, "A surprise." The surprise turned out to be a wheelchair he'd built from salvaged wagon parts and a broken chair from the barn. It wasn't elegant, but it was sturdy with wheels that could handle the rough ground around the ranch. "So you can move freely," he explained, suddenly shy as he presented it, "until your legs are strong enough." Margaret ran her hands over the wooden arms, tears streaming down her face. "Samuel, this is... no one has ever... Everyone deserves independence," he said simply, "even when they need help." She insisted on trying it immediately, wheeling herself around the cabin with growing confidence. Clara ran alongside, delighted by her mother's newfound mobility. That evening, as rain continued to fall softly outside, Margaret wheeled herself to the stove and cooked dinner for the first time since her injury. It was just stew, nothing fancy, but Samuel acted like it was a feast. "I'd forgotten what it felt like," Margaret said as they ate. "To be useful." "You've always been useful," Samuel protested. "No, I've been present. There's a difference." She reached across the table to take his hand. "But this being able to contribute, to choose what I do instead of just accepting what's done for me, this is freedom." Isaiah raised his cup. "To freedom then, in all its forms." They toasted with coffee, Clara clinking her milk cup against theirs with solemn ceremony. As the days passed, Margaret grew stronger. She could stand now for brief periods supporting herself on Samuel's arm. They would practice in the evenings, him patient and steady, her determined despite the pain. "We're like a three-legged race," Clara observed one evening, watching them move slowly across the cabin. "Except we're choosing to be tied together," Samuel said, steadying Margaret as she wobbled. "Is that what marriage is?" Clara asked. Choosing to be tied together, Margaret and Samuel exchanged glances over her head. "In a way," Margaret said, "it's choosing to support each other even when it slows you down." "Or speeds you up," Samuel added, helping Margaret to her chair. "Sometimes having someone beside you makes you stronger than you'd be alone." Tom's wife, Ellen, arrived a week before the wedding with a trunk that made Clara squeal with delight. "My own wedding dress," Ellen announced, pulling out cream-colored silk, yellowed slightly with age but still beautiful. "Been saving it for someone who needed it." "I couldn't," Margaret protested. "You could, and you will," Ellen said firmly. "It's been 20 years since I wore it. About time it saw another wedding." She also brought fabric for Clara's dress, and the women spent the afternoon sewing while the men worked outside. It was domestic in a way Margaret hadn't experienced since before the war, when she'd quilted with her mother and sisters. "Samuel's different." Ellen observed her needle moving in steady rhythm. "Tom says he hasn't seen him this alive since before he lost Mary." "He saved us," Margaret said simply. "Seems to me you saved each other," Ellen replied. 3 days before the wedding, Margaret stood on her own for a full minute. It wasn't graceful, she shook like a leaf in a storm, but she stood. Samuel wasn't there to see it, but Clara was, and she ran to find him in the barn. Mama stood all by herself. Samuel dropped the harness he was mending and ran, his bad leg forgotten. He found Margaret back in her wheelchair, exhausted but glowing. "Show me," he said. "I can't. Not yet. I used everything I had." She gripped his hands. "But I did it, Samuel. I stood on my own." He knelt beside her chair, bringing himself to her eye level. "You've been standing on your own since I met you, Margaret. Your legs just finally got the message." That night, after Clara was asleep, they sat by the fire planning their future. "I want to expand the ranch," Samuel said. "Maybe raise horses instead of just cattle. Easier work, and Clara loves them." "I want to help," Margaret said. "Really help, not just cook and clean. I have medical training. Maybe we could offer aid to other ranchers, build connections." "A ranch and a medical practice," Samuel mused. Mary would have loved that idea. "You mention her often," Margaret observed, but not critically. "Does it bother you?" Margaret considered. "No. It tells me you know how to love deeply, that you don't forget people who matter." She paused. "I hope someday you'll mention me that way, if something happens." "Nothing's going to happen," Samuel said firmly. "Something always happens. That's life." Margaret took his hand. "But whatever comes, I want you to know, these weeks with you have been the happiest I've remembered since childhood. Before the war, before Marcus, before everything broke. You've given me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever." Samuel brought her hand to his lips, kissing it gently. "You've given me a reason to wake up that isn't just habit." The day before the wedding disaster nearly struck, a telegram arrived from Denver. Marcus had been spotted heading back toward the territory with new men. But the telegram also brought relief. He'd been arrested 50 miles away for horse theft. He would be facing trial and likely prison. "It's over," Margaret breathed the telegram, shaking in her hands. "Really over." "That chapter is," Samuel agreed. "Tomorrow we start a new one." That evening, the cabin filled with neighbors and friends. Tom brought his fiddle Patrick, his harmonica. Music filled the air for the first time since Mary's death. Clara danced with Isaiah, standing on his feet as he moved her around the room. Margaret watched from her wheelchair, clapping along. Then Samuel extended his hand. "Dance with me. I can't. Trust me." He lifted her, carefully supporting most of her weight, and they swayed together to Tom's slow melody. Margaret's feet barely touched the ground, but it didn't matter. They were dancing, and she was crying and laughing and alive in ways she'd forgotten were possible. "Tomorrow," Samuel whispered in her ear, "you become my wife. But tonight, you're already my everything." The music played on, and one by one the others joined them. Isaiah with Clara on his hip, Tom with Ellen Patrick dancing alone but smiling. The cabin that had held so much sorrow now overflowed with joy. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, each one offered congratulations and promises to return tomorrow. Martha, the last to go, pressed something into Margaret's hand, a small silver locket. "Was my mother's," she said gruffly. "Something borrowed for tomorrow." After everyone left the three of them, their little family sat together in the quiet. Claire had fallen asleep against Samuel's shoulder, her new dress for tomorrow hanging on the wall like a promise. "Are you happy?" Samuel asked Margaret quietly. She thought about the question, really considered it. Her legs were still mostly useless. They had little money. The ranch was hard work that would only get harder. Marcus might someday return. Life offered no guarantees. "Yes," she said finally. Completely. And she was. Not the fragile happiness of avoiding pain, but the deep-rooted joy of choosing love despite the pain, of building something from broken pieces, of finding home not in a place, but in people who chose each other daily. Tomorrow would bring vows and witnesses making legal what the heart had already decided. But tonight, in the quiet cabin with rain starting to fall again outside, they were already bound by something stronger than law, the choice to build a life together from the ashes of their separate griefs. Samuel carried Clara to her bed, tucking her in gently. Margaret wheeled herself over to kiss her daughter goodnight. "Tomorrow you get a papa," Margaret whispered. "I already have one," Clara murmured sleepily. "Got him the day he carried you home." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. She looked at Samuel, who was suspiciously wiping at his own eyes. "Out of the mouths of babes," he said softly. They sat together by the dying fire hands, clasped, watching the embers glow. No more words were needed. Tomorrow would come with its ceremony and celebration. But tonight, they were simply three broken people who'd found wholeness in each other, sitting in a cabin that had become a home, listening to the rain that blessed the dry land like tears of joy from heaven itself. The old life was ending. The new one had already begun. The wedding morning arrived with cloudless skies and a meadowlark's song. Judge Thompson had arrived the night before, a dignified man with silver whiskers who'd immediately charmed Clara by teaching her to whistle like the birds. The cabin and yard bustled with activity as neighbors arrived early to help with preparations. Ellen commanded the kitchen with military precision, directing three other ranch wives in preparing the feast. Tom and Patrick had built a makeshift altar near the big cottonwood, decorated with Clara's carefully gathered wild flowers. Isaiah stood as Samuel's best man, having pressed his old Union dress uniform for the occasion. Margaret sat before the small mirror in the bedroom, Ellen pinning up her hair, while Clara danced around them in her new blue dress. "You're beautiful, Mama," Clara breathed, "like a princess in the storybooks." "Princesses can walk," Margaret said wryly, adjusting the cream silk dress that pooled around her wheelchair. Not all of them, Clara said firmly. Some princesses have different kinds of magic. Ellen secured the last pin. The child's right. You've got magic enough, Margaret Shaw. Soon to be Margaret Travis. A knock at the door interrupted them. Ladies, Isaiah's voice called. There's someone here to see Margaret. Margaret's blood ran cold. Marcus. Somehow, despite the telegram, despite the arrest. But when the door opened, it wasn't Marcus. It was a woman, elderly, but straight-backed, with eyes the same green as Margaret's. Mother, Margaret breathed. Elizabeth Shaw stood in the doorway, travel-dusty but dignified, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her daughter. My girl, she whispered. My brave, brave girl. They embraced Margaret, sobbing into her mother's shoulder, while Clara watched with wide eyes. How did you— I didn't write. I didn't know how to explain. Isaiah found me, Elizabeth said, pulling back to cup Margaret's face. Sent a telegram to Philadelphia, said you were getting married to a good man, that you were free of Marcus, that you needed family. But father— Your father's been dead 2 years, Margaret. Apoplexy took him quick. Elizabeth's expression softened. I've been searching for you ever since. Marcus told us you died in a stage accident. The cruelty of that lie hit Margaret like a physical blow. All this time, her mother had been mourning her. Grandmama, Clara said tentatively. Elizabeth turned to her granddaughter, tears streaming. Oh, child, look at you. Last time I saw you, you were barely walking. I remember you, Clara said suddenly. You smell like lavender. You used to sing to me. Still do smell like lavender. Elizabeth laughed through her tears. And I'll sing to you again, if you'd like. Samuel appeared in the doorway, dressed in his best clothes, looking uncertain. I don't mean to intrude. Samuel, Margaret said, wiping her eyes. This is my mother, Elizabeth Shaw. Mother, this is Samuel Travis. Elizabeth studied him with sharp eyes. So you're the man who saved my daughter. She saved herself, ma'am. I just offered shelter. Isaiah told me what you did. Standing against Marcus and his men. Elizabeth extended her hand. You have my gratitude and my blessing, Mr. Travis. Samuel took her hand gently. Family is always welcome here, Mrs. Shaw. Elizabeth, please. And I hope to earn that welcome. She looked around the simple cabin. This is a good place, an honest place. Margaret, you found something real here. The wedding itself was simple, but perfect. Samuel stood at the altar with Isaiah, his weathered face soft with emotion as Tom's fiddle began the wedding march. Patrick had built a smooth wooden ramp, and Clara walked beside Margaret's wheelchair, scattering flower petals with solemn concentration. Margaret had managed to stand for the vows, Samuel's arm steady around her waist, her mother holding her other arm. The words were traditional, but the weight behind them was anything but. When Samuel promised to honor and cherish, his voice broke slightly. When Margaret vowed to love and support, tears ran freely down her cheeks. You may kiss your bride, Judge Thompson announced with a smile. Samuel cupped Margaret's face gently, his kiss soft and sure, a promise sealed. The assembled crowd erupted in cheers, Clara loudest of all. The celebration that followed filled the yard with laughter and music. Tables groaned under the weight of food neighbors had brought. Children ran between the adults' legs playing tag, while their parents danced to Tom's fiddle and Patrick's harmonica. Margaret watched from her wheelchair, her new husband beside her, her mother on her other side, Clara in her lap. The sight of community, of belonging, overwhelmed her. I haven't seen this many people happy in one place since before the war, Elizabeth observed. They're good people, Samuel said. They've all known loss, but they haven't let it make them mean. Doc Wilson approached a gruff older man who'd initially been skeptical of Isaiah's medical knowledge. Mrs. Travis, he said formally, Isaiah tells me you trained under Hammond in Philadelphia. I did, Margaret confirmed, suddenly nervous. I've been thinking. This territory needs medical help. I'm getting too old to ride out to all the ranches. Isaiah's good, but he can't be everywhere. He cleared his throat, wondering if you might consider helping out once you're steadier on your feet. Margaret's heart leaped. You mean practice medicine? Don't see why not. You've got the training. And from what Isaiah says, the talent. He grimaced. Might raise some eyebrows, woman doctor and all, but out here people care more about competence than convention. Yes, absolutely. Doc Wilson nodded curtly. Good. Come by my office when you're able. We'll discuss terms. He walked away before Margaret could thank him. Did that just happen? She asked Samuel. Looks like you're going to be a doctor after all. He said, pride evident in his voice. Elizabeth squeezed her daughter's hand. Your father would roll over in his grave, which makes it even better. As the afternoon wore on, the veterans who'd stood with Samuel against Marcus gathered near the cottonwood sharing war stories and whiskey. Margaret could hear fragments of their conversation. Battles, remembered friends, mourned the strange adjustment to peace. Never thought I'd see Samuel happy again, one said. Man deserves it after everything, another replied. We all do, Tom added. Question is whether we can let ourselves have it. Martha approached Margaret as the sun began to sink. I wasn't kind when you first arrived, she said bluntly. Saw a broken woman with a child, figured you'd bring trouble. We did bring trouble, Margaret pointed out. No, you brought a reason for this community to stand together. Been too long since we did that. Martha gestured to the gathering. Look at them, veterans, ranchers, town folk. All here because Samuel Travis found love again, and we wanted to witness it. She pressed a small package into Margaret's hands. Wedding gift. It's not much. Margaret opened it to find a set of surgical instruments, old but well-maintained. Was my husband's, Martha explained. He was a doctor before the war. Died at Antietam. They've been sitting in a drawer for 15 years. Seems right they should be used again. Martha, I can't accept. You can and you will. Put them to use. That's all I ask. As evening approached, Elizabeth took Clara inside to help her change out of her now dirty dress. Margaret could hear them through the window, her mother teaching Clara the same lullaby she'd once sung to Margaret. Your mother seems formidable, Samuel observed. She is. Raised 4 daughters mostly alone while father pursued his business interests. Margaret paused. I was afraid to contact her, afraid she'd be ashamed of what I'd become. And instead, she's proud. Margaret wiped at fresh tears. I'd forgotten what that felt like, having someone be proud of me. I'm proud of you, Samuel said quietly. Every day. The party continued into the evening lanterns, casting warm light as stories grew taller and laughter grew louder. Clara had fallen asleep in Elizabeth's arms, worn out from excitement. Isaiah and Patrick debated cavalry tactics with good-natured fervor. Tom's fiddle had been joined by another veteran's guitar, creating impromptu concerts. Then hoofbeats sounded on the road. Everyone tensed, hands moving instinctively toward weapons. The war might be over, but vigilance died hard. But the rider who appeared was young, barely 16, wearing a Western Union uniform. Telegram for Samuel Travis, he called out. Samuel took it frowning as he read. His expression shifted from concern to something Margaret couldn't identify. What is it? She asked. He handed her the telegram. It was from Colonel Morrison at Fort Collins. Marcus Shaw killed attempting escape. Threat ended. Congratulations on your marriage. Military honors for your service approved. Pension reinstated Morrison. Margaret stared at the words. Marcus was dead. The shadow that had hung over them even after his arrest was gone. It's over, she whispered. Really, truly over. No, Samuel corrected gently. It's beginning. The news spread quickly through the gathering. There was no celebration of Marcus's death. These were people who'd seen too much death to rejoice in it, but there was a palpable sense of relief. Now you can build without looking over your shoulder, Tom said. Now we all can, Samuel replied, his arm around Margaret. As the evening wound down, guests began to leave, each offering congratulations and promises to visit. The veteran saluted Samuel, a gesture he returned with moisture in his eyes. The ranch wives hugged Margaret, welcoming her formally into their informal sisterhood. Finally, only family remained. Elizabeth had put Clara to bed and sat by the fire knitting needles, clicking rhythmically. Isaiah cleaned up the medical supplies he'd brought, preparing for his departure in the morning. "You're leaving?" Margaret asked, surprised and disappointed. "My work here is done," Isaiah said with a smile. "You're healing well. You've got Doc Wilson to work with, and Samuel doesn't need me anymore." "Where will you go?" "West California, maybe. Heard there are communities there that need doctors' places where a black man with medical training might build something." He paused. "You've inspired me, Margaret, seeing you refuse to let injury define you. Maybe it's time I stopped letting other people's prejudice define me." "You'll always have a home here," Samuel said firmly. "Always." Isaiah clasped his hand. "I know. That's what makes it possible to leave." Later, when the house was quiet and Elizabeth had retired to Clara's room, Samuel and Margaret sat alone by the dying fire. It was their wedding night, but there was no awkwardness between them, just comfortable companionship. "How does it feel?" Samuel asked. "Being Margaret Travis." She considered. "Like coming home to a place I've never been before." "I want to do right by you," he said suddenly. "By you and Clara both. I want to be the man you deserve." "You already are." She took his hand. "Samuel, you gave us sanctuary when we were strangers. You stood against armed men for us. You built me a wheelchair so I could have independence. You accepted my mother without question. What more could you possibly do? Love you the way you deserve to be loved, without reservation or condition." "Then we're even," Margaret said, "because that's exactly how I love you." They sat in comfortable silence, then Margaret spoke again. "I can stand long enough now. If you help me to the bedroom." Samuel's eyes widened slightly, then softened. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He lifted her gently, carrying her to what was now their bedroom. The night that followed was tender and patient, two wounded souls finding healing in each other's embrace. The next morning brought a new rhythm to the ranch. Elizabeth took over much of the cooking, freeing Margaret to work on her medical studies with the instruments Martha had given her. Clara helped Samuel with the morning chores, chattering constantly about everything and nothing. "Papa Samuel," she said suddenly as they fed the chickens. "Is that what I should call you now?" Samuel's throat tightened. "You can call me whatever feels right." "Papa," she tried, then smiled. "Papa, I like it." "So do I, little one. So do I." Isaiah left after breakfast, but not before giving Margaret detailed instructions for her continued recovery, and Samuel a knowing smile. "Take care of each other," he said simply, then rode west toward whatever future awaited him. The weeks that followed established new patterns. Margaret grew stronger, able to walk short distances with a cane Samuel carved for her. She began accompanying Doc Wilson on his rounds, learning the practical aspects of frontier medicine. The townspeople, initially skeptical, soon accepted her, especially after she successfully delivered the Henderson's twins when Doc Wilson was delayed by a storm. Elizabeth proved to be a formidable addition to the household teaching. Clara her letters and numbers, organizing the cabin with ruthless efficiency, and slowly drawing out stories from Samuel about his life before the war. "You were a teacher," she said one evening, not asking. "How did you know?" "The way you explain things to Clara, patient, thorough. You love knowledge for its own sake." "I taught at a small school in Connecticut. Latin, Greek, some mathematics." He smiled at the memory. "Seems like a different lifetime." "Maybe you could teach again," Elizabeth suggested. "This territory needs schools." "Maybe," Samuel said, but Margaret could see the idea taking root. One evening, a month after the wedding, they received unexpected visitors. 3 women, all wearing black, traveling in a wagon with 2 children. "We heard about you," one said to Margaret. Heard you stood up to your husband. That you got free." Margaret invited them in, sensing their desperation. Over tea, their story emerged. All three were fleeing abusive situations heading west with no clear destination. "We can't pay much," one said, "but we can work. We just need somewhere safe for a while." Samuel and Margaret exchanged glances. The ranch was small, resources limited, but they both remembered what it was like to need sanctuary. "The barn has a loft," Samuel said. "We could fix it up, make it livable." "We can help with the ranch work," another woman offered eagerly. "We're not afraid of hard labor." "Then you're welcome," Margaret said simply. Elizabeth, listening from her knitting chair, nodded approvingly. "This place is becoming a proper community." And it was. Word spread somehow through what networks Margaret could only guess. Women seeking safety, veterans needing purpose, families looking for fresh starts. Not all stayed, but many did, building small cabins on the expanded ranch land, contributing labor and skills. By autumn, what had been Samuel's solitary ranch had become something else entirely. A small schoolhouse stood near the main road where Samuel taught 3 days a week. A medical clinic occupied what had been the barn where Margaret and Doc Wilson treated everything from broken bones to difficult births. Elizabeth ran a boarding house for women in transition, providing shelter and time to heal. "We're building a town," Clara observed one day, watching from her favorite spot in the cottonwood tree. "No," Samuel corrected, lifting her down. "We're building something better. We're building a family." That evening, as the extended household gathered for dinner, 12 people now with more coming, Margaret stood to make an announcement. She could stand easily now, though she still used the cane for longer distances. "I have news," she said, suddenly shy. Samuel looked at her with concern. "Are you all right?" "More than all right." She took his hand, placed it on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby." The room erupted in joy. Elizabeth wept. Clara danced. The women cheered. Samuel stood frozen, his hand on Margaret's belly, tears streaming down his weathered face. "A baby," he whispered. "Our baby." "Our baby," Margaret confirmed. Later, after the celebration had died down and the house had quieted, Samuel and Margaret stood on the porch, looking out at the lights from the other cabins dotting their land. From solitude to this, Samuel marveled. "Sometimes I can hardly believe it." "Believe it," Margaret said, leaning into his warmth. "We've earned it, all of us." "What do you think Mary would say?" he asked suddenly. About all this, Margaret considered. "I think she'd say you've honored her memory by choosing to live fully again. And Marcus would hate it," Margaret said with satisfaction. "Which makes it even better." They laughed, the sound carrying across the dark prairie. Somewhere an owl called. In the distance, a baby cried in one of the cabins and was quickly soothed. Life in all its messy, beautiful complexity surrounded them. "No regrets?" Samuel asked. "Only one," Margaret said. He looked at her with concern. "I wish we'd found each other sooner." "We found each other when we were meant to," Samuel said. "When we were ready to build this." He gestured to the transformed ranch. "This couldn't have happened if either of us hadn't been broken first. We had to know what loss felt like to appreciate what we've gained." Margaret nodded, understanding. They stood together in comfortable silence, two people who'd walked through hell and chosen to build heaven from the ashes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, babies to deliver, children to teach, broken people to shelter. But tonight, they were simply Samuel and Margaret Travis, standing on their porch, surrounded by the community they'd created, complete in ways neither had imagined possible. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and eternal. But below them, in this small corner of Colorado territory, love had built something extraordinary from the ruins of tragedy. And it was just beginning. The blizzard arrived without warning on a December morning 3 months after Margaret had announced her pregnancy. Samuel had seen storms before, but this was different. a white wall of fury that descended from the mountains like God's own wrath, swallowing the world in minutes. He'd been in the barn with Tom planning the spring planting when the temperature dropped 20 degrees in as many seconds. The horses screamed, sensing what was coming. "Get everyone inside," Samuel shouted over the sudden wind. "Now!" Tom ran for the schoolhouse where Samuel had been teaching. Samuel sprinted toward the medical clinic where Margaret was treating the Johnson boy's broken arm. The snow hit before he made it halfway, so thick and violent he couldn't see his own hands. He found the clinic by memory more than sight, crashing through the door in a whirlwind of snow and ice. Margaret looked up from her patient startled. "Blizzard," he gasped. "Bad one. We need everyone in the main house." Margaret, now 6 months pregnant but still mobile with her cane, immediately understood. "Mrs. Johnson, can you carry Timothy? We need to move quickly." Within minutes, they were fighting through the storm toward the main house. Samuel carried the injured boy, while Margaret leaned heavily on Mrs. Johnson, her pregnancy and lingering weakness, making the short journey treacherous. The wind tried to tear them apart, to scatter them into the white void, but they held tight to each other. The main house was already filling when they arrived. Elizabeth had taken charge, directing families to different rooms, organizing blankets and supplies. Clara ran between groups, counting heads with the serious determination of a child given an important task. "How many?" Samuel asked Tom, who'd made it back with the school children. 23 so far, but the Martins are still in their cabin, and the 3 women in the east cottage. "I'll go," Samuel said, but Margaret caught his arm. "You can't. Look at it." The windows showed nothing but white, so thick it seemed solid. "You'll die out there." "They'll die if I don't." Before the argument could continue, the door burst open. Patrick stumbled in ice, coating his beard, dragging someone behind him. It was Sarah Martin, one of the women who'd fled an abusive marriage, unconscious and blue with cold. "Found her halfway here," Patrick gasped. "She was trying to get her children. They're still in the cabin with her sister." "How many children?" Margaret asked, already examining Sarah for frostbite. 3. Youngest is only 2. Samuel was already wrapping rope around his waist. "Tom, Patrick, we form a chain. No one goes beyond the rope's length." "Samuel, no," Margaret pleaded, but he was already moving. "I didn't save you to lose you to a storm," he said, kissing her quickly. "I'll be back." The 3 men ventured into the white hell rope taut between them. The world beyond the door was apocalyptic wind that could knock a man down snow so thick, breathing became drowning cold that burned like fire. Samuel couldn't see Tom 3 feet behind him, could only feel the rope that connected them to life. They found the Martin cabin by walking directly into it, the visibility so poor Samuel's face hit the wall before he saw it. He felt along the logs until he found the door frozen shut. It took all 3 men to break it open. Inside, huddled in the corner, were Sarah's sister Rachel and 3 children, all wrapped in every blanket they owned. The fireplace was dead, the chimney blocked by snow. "We're going to the main house," Samuel shouted over the wind. "Everyone hold on to each other. Don't let go for anything." The journey back was the longest 100 yards of Samuel's life. Tom carried the toddler inside his coat. Patrick had the 5-year-old. Samuel supported Rachel, who carried the 7-year-old. The rope was their lifeline, invisible in the white but solid under their hands. Step by agonizing step, they fought through the storm. When they finally crashed through the main house door, Margaret was there with blankets and hot water. Sarah had regained consciousness and wept at the sight of her children, all blue but breathing. "Is that everyone?" Elizabeth asked. Samuel did a mental count. The 3 women in the east cottage, Widow Henderson, the Chavez family in the south cabin. "They're here," Claire interrupted. "Mr. Chavez brought them in right before you left." "But Widow Henderson—" "I'll go," said a voice from the corner. It was Marcus. No, Samuel shook his head, clearing the storm-confused thought. It was Matthew, one of the veterans who'd settled nearby, young and strong, despite missing his left arm from Gettysburg. "You can't manage alone with one arm," Tom said. "Then I'll go with him," said James, another veteran. "We don't leave people behind." Samuel wanted to protest, but he was shaking too hard, his body finally registering the cold that had nearly killed him. Margaret wrapped him in blankets, her eyes full of fear and pride. Matthew and James ventured out, returning 20 minutes later with not just Widow Henderson, but also her cat, her chickens in a crate, and her ancient mother-in-law she'd never mentioned having. "Couldn't leave them," Matthew said, simply ice falling from his coat in sheets. By nightfall, the main house held 31 people, 6 dogs, a cat, and a crate of increasingly unhappy chickens. The storm showed no signs of abating. If anything, it grew worse, the wind howling like all the demons of hell were circling the house. "How long can a storm like this last?" one of the newer arrivals asked. "Days," Samuel said grimly. "Maybe a week." "Do we have supplies for that many people that long?" Elizabeth had already done the calculation. "If we're careful, yes, but we'll need to ration." Margaret, despite Samuel's protests, had set up a medical station in the corner. 2 cases of frostbite, 1 broken wrist from a fall in the storm, and several children with coughs that could turn dangerous in the crowded conditions. "We need to organize," she said, addressing the room with natural authority. "This many people in close quarters could mean disease if we're not careful. Everyone needs tasks, routines. Children especially need structure." And so they organized. Samuel and Tom managed fuel for the fire, carefully rationing wood. Elizabeth and the women organized cooking schedules. Margaret and Doc Wilson, who'd been visiting when the storm hit, handled medical needs. The children were given lessons to keep them occupied, Clara proudly helping teach the younger ones their letters. On the second night, the storm intensified. The house shook under the assault timbers groaning. One of the windows cracked from the pressure requiring quick boarding. "It's like the war," Patrick said quietly, standing watch at the reinforced window. "Surrounded, outnumbered, just trying to survive until morning." "Except this enemy doesn't care about causes or countries," Samuel replied. "It just is." On the 3rd day, they lost the barn. They heard it go, a terrible rending sound as the roof tore away. Several men wanted to try to save the animals, but Samuel held firm. "The animals have better instincts than us. They'll find shelter or they won't, but we're not losing people for livestock." That night, young Timothy Johnson's cough worsened to pneumonia. Margaret and Doc Wilson worked through the night, steaming water for him to breathe, applying poultices. Clara sat with him, telling stories to keep him calm when the fever made him delirious. "Is he going to die?" Clara asked Margaret quietly. "Not if I can help it," Margaret said firmly, but privately she worried. Without her full medical supplies, trapped by the storm options were limited. It was Sarah Martin who suggested the old remedy, an onion poultice her grandmother had used. Desperate, Margaret tried it combined with willow bark tea. By morning, Timothy's breathing had eased. On the 4th day, tensions began to rise. 31 people in close quarters, fear and frustration building like pressure in a kettle. An argument broke out over food distribution. 2 of the men nearly came to blows over sleeping arrangements. It was Clara who broke the tension. She stood up during dinner and announced, "We should have a talent show." The adults looked at her in bewilderment. "Mama always said when things are bad, you need something good to look forward to," she explained. "So tonight, everyone has to share something. A song, a story, a trick, anything." And somehow, impossibly, it worked. That night, the house filled with unexpected revelations. Tom played fiddle, of course, but Widow Henderson surprised everyone with a bawdy sailor's song from her youth. Matthew juggled despite his missing arm. The Chavez children performed a traditional Mexican dance. Doc Wilson recited Shakespeare from memory, the entire balcony scene from Romeo and Juliet, playing both parts. Margaret sang the lullaby her mother had taught her, her voice carrying over the storm. Samuel watched her, this woman carrying his child, holding together a community through sheer will and compassion, and felt his heart might burst from loving her. When it was his turn, Samuel told the story of Odysseus returning home after the war, finding it changed, fighting to reclaim his place. The parallels weren't lost on the veterans in the room. But here's what Homer didn't say, Samuel concluded. Sometimes home isn't a place you return to. Sometimes it's a place you build board by board, person by person. Sometimes the storm that tries to destroy you is the very thing that shows you how strong you've become together. On the 5th day, the storm began to weaken. They could see shapes through the snow, now the ghostly outline of where the barn had been, the trees bent nearly horizontal but still standing. On the 6th day, it stopped. The silence was almost as shocking as the storm had been. People crept to the windows like children peering out at a transformed world. Snow drifted to the roof in some places, while wind had scoured the ground bare in others. The landscape was alien, unrecognizable. "The animals," someone said, and everyone's heart sank. Surely nothing could have survived. But when they dug their way to where the barn had been, they found most of the horses and cattle clustered in the lee of the ruins, snow-covered but alive. They'd used the fallen timbers as windbreak, huddling together for warmth. "Smart beasts," Tom said admiringly. The chickens improbably had somehow gotten into the root cellar and were pecking irritably at the potato stores. Even Widow Henderson's cat emerged from somewhere dignified and disdainful as ever. The real miracle, though, was that they hadn't lost a single person. 31 souls had weathered the worst storm in territorial history, and all had survived. As they dug out and took stock, the larger miracle became apparent. The storm had transformed them. These weren't just neighbors anymore. They'd become something more, a true community bonded by shared survival. "We need to rebuild the barn," Samuel said, looking at the wreckage. "We'll all help," Matthew said immediately. "Many hands light work." "And we should build a community shelter," Margaret added. "Something stronger for the next storm." "There'll be a next one?" young Timothy asked, still weak but recovering. "There's always a next one," Samuel said. "But next time we'll be ready." The rebuilding began immediately. Not just the barn, but relationships. The men who'd nearly fought worked side by side. The women who'd fled broken marriages found sisterhood with the ranch wives. The children, having lived and played together for a week, had formed bonds that would last lifetimes. Margaret, watching it all, felt the baby move strongly within her. "You're coming into a good world," she told it quietly. "A hard world, but a good one." 3 weeks later, when the barn was nearly complete, Isaiah returned. He'd been caught by the storm in Denver, had started back as soon as the roads were passable. "Thought I'd find devastation," he said, looking around at the busy, thriving ranch. "Instead, I find this." "The storm didn't break us," Samuel said simply. "It made us stronger." "Storms do that sometimes," Isaiah agreed, "if you're lucky enough to have good people around you." That evening, as the community gathered for dinner in the rebuilt barn, a celebration of survival and recovery, Margaret stood to speak. "Before the storm, we were individuals happening to live near each other. The storm changed that. We became family." She looked around at the faces all turned toward her. "I propose we make it official, form a township, build a school, a proper medical clinic, a meeting hall, create something lasting." "What would we call it?" someone asked. Clara raised her hand. "Haven. We should call it Haven, because that's what it is." The vote was unanimous. That night, as Samuel and Margaret lay together, the baby active between them, they marveled at the journey that had brought them here. "From a broken woman on the road to the founder of a township," Samuel said. "Quite a transformation. From a solitary rancher to the patriarch of a community," Margaret countered, "equally impressive." "We did it together." everything together, Margaret agreed. That's the only way it works. Outside, snow began to fall again, but gently this time. Inside their house, now truly a home, they were warm and safe, surrounded by the sounds of their community settling in for the night. Dogs barking, children laughing, adults calling good nights across the yards. "Do you think the baby heard the storm?" Margaret asked. "Will it remember? Maybe." Samuel set his hand on her belly. "Maybe it'll be born knowing that storms pass, that people survive, that communities endure." A good lesson to learn early. As they drifted toward sleep, Clara crept into their room, a habit from the storm week they hadn't discouraged. "Papa," she whispered. "Mama." "What is it, little one?" Samuel asked. "I'm not scared. I just wanted to say, I'm glad we're a family, all of us, the whole town." She climbed into bed between them, careful of Margaret's belly, and the three, soon to be four, lay together, listening to the gentle snow. "Tell me a story," Clara requested. "About the storm." "Which part?" Samuel asked. "The part where we all survived, where we all saved each other." So Samuel began, his voice low and warm in the darkness. "Once there was a storm that thought it could break a community. But the storm didn't know about the soldier who'd learned that no one fights alone. It didn't know about the nurse who understood that healing happens together. It didn't know about the little girl who reminded everyone that joy exists even in darkness." By the time he finished, both Clara and Margaret were asleep. Samuel lay awake a bit longer, listening to the sounds of his family breathing, his community existing, his world continuing, despite everything that had tried to stop it. The storm had tested them and found them worthy. Not perfect, not without fear, but worthy of survival, worthy of each other, worthy of the future they were building together. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. The baby would come soon. Spring would demand planting. The township would need organizing. But tonight, in the aftermath of the great test, they were simply alive together and grateful. The storm had raged for 6 days, but what they'd built would last for generations. Outside, the snow continued to fall, but inside Haven, for that's what it was now, officially and truly, 31 souls slept peacefully, knowing that whatever came next, they would face it together. The storm had tried to destroy them. Instead, it had forged them into something unbreakable. And in the spring, when the snow melted and the earth emerged fertile and ready, they would plant seeds in soil made rich by struggle, watered by hope, and tended by hands that had learned the strength of holding on to each other when everything else was stripped away. The greatest storm in territorial history had passed, but the community it had created would endure long after the last witness had told the story for the final time. That was the miracle, not that they survived, but that they survived together, and in doing so discovered what home really meant. Spring arrived with Margaret's labor pains, as if the earth and her body had synchronized their rebirths. The snow was melting, creating rivers of muddy water that carved new paths across the ranch when she gripped Samuel's hand at breakfast and said, "It's time." The birth was difficult. 36 hours of labor that tested every reserve of strength Margaret possessed. Her damaged spine complicated everything, sending shooting pains down her legs with each contraction. Doc Wilson and Elizabeth worked together, while Samuel refused to leave her side, despite convention saying men shouldn't be present. "You stayed through the storm," Margaret gasped between contractions. "You stay through this." Clara had been sent to stay with the Martins, but she snuck back twice, desperate to know if her mother was all right. Each time, Elizabeth gently but firmly returned her to the neighbors. "Your mama needs to focus," Elizabeth explained, "and she needs to know you're safe." When the baby finally came, a girl healthy and loud, Margaret hemorrhaged badly. For terrifying minutes, she drifted in and out of consciousness, while Doc Wilson worked frantically to stop the bleeding. "Don't you dare," Samuel whispered fiercely, holding her face. "You don't get to leave now, not after everything." Margaret heard him as if from a great distance. She saw Mary Travis standing in the corner, holding a small boy's hand, both of them glowing with soft light. "Not yet," Mary said gently. "He needs you more than he needed me. Go back." Margaret gasped, eyes flying open, finding Samuel's terrified face above her. "There she is," Doc Wilson said with relief. "The bleeding stopped." They named the baby Hope. It was Clara's suggestion, and no one could think of anything more fitting. As Margaret recovered, the township of Haven exploded with growth. The story of how they'd survived the storm had spread, drawing new settlers seeking not just land, but community. By summer, they'd built a proper schoolhouse, a meeting hall that doubled as a church on Sundays, and laid the foundation for a medical clinic that would rival anything in Denver. Samuel divided his time between teaching ranching and serving as the de facto mayor. Margaret, once she could walk steadily again, threw herself into establishing the clinic. She'd received a letter from Dr. Hammond, her old mentor, that changed everything. "He's coming," she told Samuel, hardly believing it. "He's actually coming here." Dr. Hammond arrived in late summer, a dignified black man whose reputation preceded him. He'd been Surgeon General of the United States Army, removed from the position for being too progressive, too insistent on treating all soldiers equally regardless of race. "Margaret Shaw," he said warmly, then corrected himself. "Margaret Travis, you've built something remarkable here." "We all have," Margaret replied, but he shook his head. "Leaders matter. You and your husband have created something special, a place where merit matters more than color or gender or past mistakes." He'd brought supplies, books, and most importantly, official certification papers. "I can't make you a legal doctor," he explained. "The medical boards wouldn't recognize it, but I can certify you as a trained medical practitioner under my authority. It's not everything, but it's something." It was more than something. It was validation of everything Margaret had worked for. The ceremony happened on a Sunday afternoon. The whole town gathered. Dr. Hammond presented Margaret with a medical bag bearing her name, and Doc Wilson formally welcomed her as his partner in practice. "About time we made it official," Wilson said gruffly. "Been doing the work anyway." That evening, as the celebration continued, a lone rider approached. The festivities stopped as people recognized him, Richard Morrison, Samuel's former colonel, now a general. "Samuel," he said, dismounting, "I hear you've built yourself a town." "We've built a community, sir," Samuel corrected carefully. Morrison looked around at the diverse gathering: former slaves and former slaveholders, Union and Confederate veterans, Mexican families, Chinese railroad workers who'd settled after the tracks were done, women who'd fled various troubles, all mingling freely. "This shouldn't work," Morrison said bluntly. "But it does," Samuel replied. Morrison was quiet for a moment, then pulled out an official-looking document. "The territory of Colorado is organizing formally. They need townships with proper charters, legitimate leadership." He handed the papers to Samuel. "I'm recommending Haven for official recognition. You as mayor, if you'll accept." Samuel looked at Margaret, who nodded. "I accept on one condition. The town charter includes provisions for all residents to vote regardless of race or gender." Morrison's eyebrows rose. "That's irregular. So is surviving what we've survived. We do things differently here." After consideration, Morrison nodded. "Draft your charter. I'll push it through." As Morrison prepared to leave, he pulled Samuel aside. "There's something else. They're building a railroad spur. It could come through here if you want it." Samuel thought of the quiet life he'd once sought, the isolation he'd craved. Then he looked at the thriving community, at Margaret holding Hope, while Clara danced with the other children. "We want it," he said. The railroad brought challenges. Workers flooded in, not all of them respectful of what Haven had built. A saloon opened, then another. Fights broke out. The careful balance they'd created threatened to tip. It was Clara, now 8, and wise beyond her years, who proposed the solution at a town meeting. "We need rules," she said, standing on a box to be seen. "Not mean rules, but fair ones. Like in our house, everyone contributes, everyone's respected. Nobody hurts anybody else." They drafted Haven's laws that night. No weapons in the saloons. No discrimination in business dealings. Disputes settled by counsel, not violence. Anyone could stay if they contributed. Anyone who threatened the peace would be asked to leave. "It's idealistic," someone pointed out. "So was surviving the storm," Samuel replied. The first test came when a group of former Confederate raiders tried to drive out the Chavez family, claiming they didn't belong. The town's response was swift and unified. Every single resident, including several Confederate veterans, stood with the Chavez family. "You fought for the wrong side," one raider spat at a Confederate veteran named William. "Maybe," William replied, "but I'm on the right side now." The raiders left. Word spread that Haven was different, protected, unified. It attracted some and repelled others' natural selection for community building. Margaret's clinic became a medical training ground. She and Dr. Hammond taught anyone willing to learn women former slaves, anyone with steady hands and compassion. It scandalized proper society and inspired progressive thinkers in equal measure. "We're creating the future," Dr. Hammond said one evening as they reviewed student progress. "Medicine without prejudice." One of their students was Rachel Martin Sarah's sister, who'd shown remarkable aptitude. Another was Chen Wei, a former railroad worker whose knowledge of Chinese medicine complemented Western practices. The combination led to treatments neither tradition alone could have achieved. Hope grew rapidly, a cheerful baby who seemed to embody her name. She had Samuel's blue eyes and Margaret's determined chin. Clara doted on her appointing herself chief protector and educator. "She needs to know everything," Clara declared. "How to shoot, how to heal, how to read, how to run a town." "She's 6 months old," Margaret laughed. "It's never too early to start learning," Clara replied seriously. The harvest that year was exceptional. The community celebrated with a festival that drew visitors from across the territory. There were competitions, racing, shooting pie baking. Tom's fiddle was joined by a full band. The Chavez family taught everyone their traditional dances. Chen Wei demonstrated martial arts that fascinated the children. During the celebration, Margaret noticed Samuel standing apart, watching with an expression she couldn't read. "What are you thinking?" she asked, joining him. "I'm thinking about Thunder," he said unexpectedly. "My horse. The day I buried him, I thought I was burying my last connection to anything that mattered. And now I realize he brought me here, to the exact spot where I needed to be at the exact moment." He pulled Margaret close. "Every loss led to this. Mary and James, you're suffering with Marcus, the war, all of it. Like rivers flowing toward the sea." "That's either very profound or very sad," Margaret said. "Both, I think. The idea that our pain has purpose doesn't make it hurt less, but it makes it mean something." That night, as the festival continued, old Martha approached them. She'd been one of the skeptics when Margaret first arrived, but had become one of their strongest supporters. "I'm dying," she said matter-of-factly. "Doc Wilson confirmed it. Cancer. Few months maybe." Margaret started to speak, but Martha waved her off. "I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm looking for a promise." She pulled out a leather portfolio. "These are the deeds to my land, 60 acres adjoining yours. I want Haven to have it, but with conditions." "What conditions?" Samuel asked. "Build a school for girls, a real one, where they learn everything boys do, plus medicine from Margaret business, from Elizabeth, whatever else they need to make their own way." She looked at Clara playing with the other children. "Girls like her deserve every chance." Margaret began, but the older woman cut her off. "I had a daughter once, would have been about your age now. Died of fever because the only doctor in town wouldn't treat her, said he had to tend to the mayor's son first." Martha's eyes were dry but fierce. "What you're building here, this place where that wouldn't happen, where my daughter would have been saved regardless of who her father was. I want to be part of that. even after I'm gone. They built Martha's School for Girls that autumn with Martha herself laying the cornerstone despite her increasing weakness. She lived long enough to see the first classes start Clara among the eager students. "Good," she said from her sickbed, watching through the window as girls learned alongside boys. "That's good." She died peacefully 3 days later, Margaret and Doc Wilson with her at the end. The funeral drew hundreds. People came from across the territory to honor the woman who'd embodied the frontier spirit, tough, generous, uncompromising in her principles. "She was difficult," Samuel said in his eulogy. "Stubborn, judgmental, at times slow to trust. But once she gave her friendship, it was absolute. Once she believed in something, she fought for it with everything she had." Martha didn't just live in Haven. She helped create it challenge by challenge, choice by choice. Winter came gently that year. No great storms, just steady snow that blanketed the earth in quiet peace. The railroad spur was completed, bringing new commerce and connections. The medical clinic gained territorial recognition. The school attracted students from neighboring towns. On Christmas Eve, the town gathered in the meeting hall. Different traditions mingled: Mexican posadas, Chinese lanterns, German Christmas trees, American carols. It shouldn't have worked, but it did. Hope took her first steps that night, toddling from Margaret to Samuel to Clara in a triangle of delight. The entire hall erupted in cheers as if she were their collective child, which in a way she was. "Look what we've built," Elizabeth said to Margaret as they watched the celebration. "From running for our lives to this." "We're still building," Margaret replied. "Every day." As the evening wound down, Samuel stood to speak. "5 years ago, I lived alone on this ranch, waiting to die. I had no future, no hope, no purpose beyond existing." He looked at Margaret, at Clara, at Hope in her arms. "Then a broken woman and brave child crashed into my life, and everything changed." He gestured to the gathered crowd. "Look around, former enemies breaking bread together. Different colors, different faiths, different paths, all choosing to build something together. We're not perfect. We'll make mistakes. But we've proven something important: that people can change, that communities can heal, that the future doesn't have to look like the past." "To Haven," someone shouted. "To Haven," the crowd echoed, but Samuel raised his hand for silence. "No, to each other. To the choice we make every day to be better than we were, to lift each other up, to turn strangers into family. That's the real miracle." As the gathering dispersed into the snowy night, families walking home together, Margaret stood with Samuel on the hall's porch, watching their town settle into sleep. "Do you think it will last?" she asked. "What we've built. Nothing lasts forever," Samuel said. "But the idea of it will. Somewhere someday, someone will hear about Haven and think, if they could do it, so can we. That's immortality enough." Hope fussed in Margaret's arms, and Clara took her singing the lullaby Elizabeth had taught her. The four of them stood together, a family forged from loss, looking out at a community built from courage. "Ready to go home?" Samuel asked. Margaret looked at the town they'd built, the lights in windows like stars brought to earth, the smoke from chimneys rising like prayers of gratitude. "We are home," she said. And they were. Not just in a place, but in a moment, in a choice renewed daily to face the future together. Haven had been tested by storms, by prejudice, by the weight of the past. It had not just survived, but thrived, proof that redemption was possible, that resurrection could follow crucifixion, that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simple act of opening a door to someone in need. The snow continued to fall, gentle as a benediction, covering the mistakes of yesterday, preparing the ground for tomorrow's growth. And in the Travis house, as in all the houses of Haven, families settled in for the night, grateful for shelter, for community, for the second chances that had brought them all home. 10 years had passed since the great storm. Clara stood at the podium in the meeting hall, 20 years old. now poised and confident as she delivered the valedictorian address for Haven's first graduating class of the Martha School for Girls. Hope, now 11, watched her sister with undisguised admiration from the front row. "We're the daughters of Haven." Clara began, her voice carrying the strength Margaret had instilled and the wisdom Samuel had taught. "Born not from ease, but from struggle. Not from perfection, but from the choice to be better each day than we were the day before." Margaret, her hair now streaked with silver, gripped Samuel's hand. The cane was gone, replaced by only the slightest limp that showed in wet weather. The years had been kind to them in ways neither had dared hope for when they'd first met on that dusty road. "Today, 5 of us leave for college," Clara continued. 2 to study medicine, 1 law, 1 engineering, and 1, she smiled, to study education so she can return and teach the next generation. "We leave not to abandon Haven, but to carry its spirit into the wider world." In the audience, Dr. Hammond, now in his 70s, but still sharp, nodded approvingly. He'd stayed, making Haven his permanent home, establishing what had become the Hammond-Travis Medical Institute, the territory's first integrated medical training facility. The ceremony concluded with the presentation of diplomas. Each graduate received not just a certificate, but a leather medical bag law book or tool set practical gifts from a practical community. Clara's gift was different, a journal, its first page bearing a note from Samuel for the stories yet to be written. That evening, the town celebrated in the way it always did with food. From every culture represented music that blended traditions and dancing that recognized no boundaries of age or origin. The railroad had brought prosperity, but Haven had maintained its character through careful choice and collective will. Papa Hope said, tugging on Samuel's sleeve as he watched the dancing, "Tell me the story again." "Which story, little one?" "The one about how you and Mama met. The real one." Samuel lifted her onto his lap, though she was getting almost too big for it. "Your mother was broken on the side of the road, and I was broken on the inside. We fixed each other." "That's too short," Hope protested. "Tell it right." So Samuel began, as he had so many times before, weaving the tale of a lonely soldier and a desperate woman, of Clara's brave knock on the door, of standing against evil, of choosing love over fear. Other children gathered as he spoke, drawn by the familiar cadence of his voice. "And then what happened?" one of the youngest asked, though they all knew. "Then we built this," Samuel said, gesturing to the celebration around them. "All of us together." Margaret had been watching from across the room, but now she joined them, adding her voice to the story. "We learned that families aren't just blood, they're choice. Every person here chose to stay, chose to build, chose to believe in something better." "Even when the storm came?" a child asked. "Especially when the storm came," Margaret confirmed. "That's when we learned how strong we really were." As the evening progressed, Clara found herself in deep conversation with Dr. Hammond about her plans for medical school in Philadelphia. He'd arranged for her acceptance using connections that still carried weight despite the years. "You'll face challenges," he warned. "A woman in medicine, especially one who insists on treating everyone equally, will not be welcomed everywhere." "I was raised by a woman who walked again when doctors said she wouldn't," Clara replied, "and a man who rebuilt his life from ashes. I'm not afraid of challenges." "No." Dr. Hammond smiled. "I don't believe you are." The next morning brought unexpected visitors. A delegation from the state government Colorado had achieved statehood 5 years prior, arrived to officially recognize Haven as a model community. They brought with them journalists from Eastern newspapers, eager to document this experiment in equality they'd heard about. "How does it work?" one reporter asked Samuel bluntly. "Former enemies, different races, different faiths, all together." Samuel thought for a moment, then led the man to the cemetery on the hill. There, side by side, lay markers for Union and Confederate veterans, Mexican settlers and Chinese workers, Christians and Jews, and those who claimed no faith at all. "Death doesn't discriminate," Samuel said simply. "Neither should life." The journalist seemed unsatisfied with the simple answer, but Margaret, who had joined them, expanded. "We have 3 rules in Haven: contribute what you can, respect everyone's dignity, protect each other. Everything else follows from those." "But surely there are conflicts," the journalist pressed. "Of course," Margaret acknowledged. "We're human. We argue, we disagree, we sometimes hurt each other. But we've learned to repair instead of revenge, to build up instead of tear down. We've learned that being right is less important than being together." That afternoon, the delegation toured the medical institute, the schools, the thriving businesses. They saw Chinese medicine practiced alongside Western techniques, former slaves teaching former masters, women running businesses that in other towns would be forbidden to them. "This shouldn't be possible," one official muttered. "Yet here it is," Samuel replied. The truth was, it hadn't been easy. There had been failures, departures, moments when the whole experiment seemed ready to collapse. But each crisis had been met with collective will, each challenge faced together. The town's strength lay not in the absence of problems, but in the commitment to solving them together. As the delegation prepared to leave, Clara made an announcement that surprised everyone except Margaret and Samuel, who'd been part of the planning. "I'll be back from medical school each summer," she said. "And when I graduate, I'm returning permanently. But I'm not coming alone." She looked at a young man in the crowd, David Chen, son of Chen Wei, who'd been courting her carefully for 2 years. "David has been accepted to law school. We plan to marry when we both graduate and return to Haven to raise our family." The crowd erupted in celebration. Interracial marriage was illegal in many states, but Haven had always made its own rules about love and family. That evening, as the Travis family sat on their porch, expanded now to accommodate their grown family, Elizabeth emerged from the house with a telegram. Her hands shook slightly as she handed it to Margaret. "It's from the president," she said quietly. Margaret read it aloud. "The United States government officially recognizes the township of Haven, Colorado as a model community for reconstruction and reconciliation. Your methods will be studied and, where possible, implemented in other recovering communities. You have proven that America's highest ideals are achievable." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, then said, "We didn't do it for recognition." "No," Margaret agreed. "But maybe the recognition means other places will try. Other communities will believe it's possible." As night fell, the family remained on the porch. Hope had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder. Elizabeth knitted quietly in her chair. Margaret and Samuel sat close together, hands intertwined, watching the lights of their town twinkle in the darkness. "Do you ever regret it?" Margaret asked suddenly. "The quiet life you lost." Samuel considered. "I didn't lose it. I traded it for this." He gestured to their family, their town, their life. "Best trade I ever made." A rider approached in the darkness, Tom's son now serving as sheriff, making his evening rounds. He tipped his hat to them, and they waved back. Safety, community, belonging, things once thought lost forever, now so common they were taken for granted. "When I was lying under that overturned wagon," Margaret said softly, "I thought my story was ending. I never imagined this." "Neither did I," Samuel admitted. "When I buried Thunder, I thought I was burying my last connection to anything that mattered. Instead, you were planting seeds," Clara said, awake now, despite appearances. "That's what you taught us. Every ending is also a beginning." Hope stirred, murmuring in her sleep. "Tell me a story," she said drowsily. "Which one?" Samuel asked. "The one about tomorrow." Samuel smiled, pulling his youngest daughter closer. "Tomorrow the sun will rise on Haven. The Chavez family will open their bakery. Chen Wei will teach Tai Chi in the square. The school bell will ring. The clinic will heal. People will choose to be kind to each other, and we'll all be here together, building the future one day at a time." "That's a good story," Hope murmured, drifting back to sleep. "The best," Margaret agreed. As the family finally retired for the night, Samuel stood for a moment at the gate, looking out at the town they'd built. Smoke rose from chimneys. Dogs barked in friendly conversation. Somewhere, a baby cried and was quickly soothed. It was an ordinary night in an extraordinary place. He thought of all the ghosts, Mary and James, who'd blessed this new beginning. Martha, whose legacy educated girls who would change the world. The veterans who died building the railroad. All the souls who'd contributed to Haven's foundation. They were part of the story, too, woven into the very fabric of the community. "Thank you," he whispered to the night air, to the ghosts, to the God he'd rediscovered in the faces of his neighbors. Then he went inside to his wife, his daughters, his mother-in-law, his life. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, it always did. Clara would leave for school. Hope would grow up. He and Margaret would grow old. Haven would face tests they couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, all was well. The broken had been made whole. The lost had found home. The lonely had discovered family. And in a small corner of Colorado, a community had proven that people could choose to be better than their worst impulses, stronger than their deepest fears, more loving than their greatest hurts. The story that had begun with a desperate knock on a lonely rancher's door had become legend, but more than legend, it had become proof. Proof that redemption was possible, that love could conquer fear, that strangers could become family, that even in the harshest landscape, hope could take root and bloom. Haven slept peacefully under the vast Colorado sky, a beacon of what was possible when people chose compassion over comfort, courage over convention, community over isolation. It was not perfect, no human community ever could be, but it was good. And in a world that often seemed determined to tear itself apart, that goodness was miracle enough. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and indifferent. But below them, in the houses of Haven, hearts beat with purpose, dreams took shape, and love, imperfect, struggling, triumphant love, wrote its quiet victory across the prairie, one choice one day, one life at a time.